As I turned onto Maple Drive, my hands tightened on the steering wheel, my mind still processing the unexpected dispatcher scheduling change that sent me home 3 hours early. After 15 years working at the emergency dispatch center, I'd learned to savor these rare moments of unplanned free time. Maybe I'd grab Sophie and Max's favorite takeout and surprise them. It was just a regular Thursday, but small surprises had a way of making days special. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the front lawn as I pulled into the driveway. My daughter Sophie's backpack was thrown carelessly on the porch steps. That was unusual. She was normally so careful about her things. I grabbed my phone to check if she'd sent me any messages about having friends over. That's when I heard voices drifting from the backyard gazebo. "You're really meeting him again this Sunday?" a male voice asked. "Tyler, Sophie's boyfriend of 6 months." His voice was unmistakable. I froze, my hand resting on the car door handle. Something in Tyler's tone made me stop. My instincts, honed from years on the job, told me to listen. Quietly, I turned on the voice recorder app on my phone. Documenting things was second nature to me. I stepped closer, staying out of sight. "Yeah," Sophie said. "Lauren says James and Emily are excited to see us again. Mom says it's important for us to bond as a family before the move." My heart stopped. The move? What move? "What about your dad?" Tyler asked, his tone skeptical. "You can't just disappear with your mom's, what do you even call them? Her secret family?" "Lawrence isn't like that," Sophie said defensively. "He really cares about us. Mom says Dad works so much he probably won't even notice when we're gone. She's been planning this for ages with Lawrence. They've got this amazing house in his new development. Mom says once the divorce papers are served, it'll all happen really fast." My jaw tightened, but my hands stayed steady. Years of emergency dispatch work had earned me the nickname Rock for a reason. I pressed the phone closer, capturing every word. "I don't know, Soph," Tyler said, his doubt clear. "It seems messed up. Your dad's always been cool to me." "Mom says that's just his dispatcher face," Sophie replied. "She says he's emotionally unavailable. That's why she had to find someone else. Lawrence actually listens to her, you know, and his kids are great. James is only 2 years older than Max, and Emily's basically my age." I leaned against the car, letting their words sink in. Memories flooded my mind. Years of working double shifts to afford Sophie's dance classes, Max's chess tournaments, and the vacations Marina insisted we needed to stay connected as a family. I'd always thought we were connected. Had I missed something? "When did your mom even meet this Lawrence guy?" Tyler asked. "About 8 years ago," Sophie said casually. "I think it's some real estate thing. Mom says it was fate. She's been taking us to see them on Sundays for almost a year now, you know, when Dad's working. 8 years. 8 years of lies. While I worked myself to the bone, Marina had been building a second life." "Does Max know?" Tyler asked. "No," Sophie said. "Mom says he's too young to understand, but he'll adapt once we move. Lawrence's place has this amazing pool, and there's a chess club nearby that's way better than the one here." The conversation ended with the rustle of movement and the unmistakable sound of teenage kissing. I stopped the recording, climbed back into the car, and backed out of the driveway as quietly as I'd arrived. Sophie and Tyler would never know I'd been there. As I drove toward downtown, my mind switched into emergency response mode. This wasn't a highway pileup or a 5-alarm fire, but it demanded the same methodical approach. Assess the situation, gather information, formulate a response plan. Marina thought she knew me, but she didn't understand the core of who I was. My calm demeanor wasn't just a mask I wore for work, it was who I am. The steady hand in a crisis, the strategic thinker who could coordinate multiple response teams at once. Now, those skills would serve a different purpose. My first call was to Rebecca Sanders, a private investigator I'd been referred to years ago by a detective friend. I saved her number, never thinking I'd need it. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Sanders, this is Clay Martin. I find myself in need of your services, and I understand discretion is your specialty. 3 days later, I sat across from Rebecca in her office. She slid a thick folder across the desk. Lawrence Hart, she said. Real estate developer. Specializes in luxury communities. Divorced twice, both times under similar circumstances to your situation. He has a pattern of targeting married women, particularly those with access to significant financial resources. I opened the folder and stared at the photo of him. His polished smile and expensive suit couldn't mask the smug arrogance in his eyes. Tell me about the money, I said. Rebecca pulled out several bank statements. Your wife has been systematically transferring funds to a separate account for the past 5 years. Small amounts at first, but they've increased significantly in the last 18 months. The account was set up offshore by this man. She placed another photo on the desk. My stomach twisted as I recognized Ronald Chavez, my best friend of 20 years. Ronald has been helping Marina hide the money, Rebecca said. And that's not all. His wife, Janice Roberts, has been providing alibis for Marina's Sunday meetings with Hart. I clenched my jaw, fighting to maintain my composure. Ronald and Janice, the couple I trusted most, had been part of this betrayal. There's more, Rebecca continued. Hart's new development, Riverside Estates, includes a house reserved under a shell company. The paperwork traces back to an account funded partially by your inheritance from your parents. The room spun for a moment. The inheritance I received after my father's death, the money I'd entrusted to Marina to invest for our children's future, had been used to fund her new life with another man. What about Hart's children? I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm. James is 14, Emily is 17. Their mother, Teresa Fletcher, lost custody during their divorce 3 years ago. Hart's lawyers painted her as unstable and career-obsessed. Sound familiar? I nodded. It was the same narrative Marina had begun weaving about me. Thank you, I said. I want to know everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every dollar. And most importantly, I want to know exactly what she's told my children. Rebecca gave me a sympathetic nod. You've got it, Mr. Martin. I'll keep you updated. As I left her office, my phone buzzed with a text from Max. Chess club running late. Need pickup at 6. Perfect. That gave me just enough time to start setting the wheels in motion. Marina had no idea that her carefully planned escape would become her undoing. I'd spent my life managing emergencies, and now I was facing the greatest one of all. It was time to fight for my family, with the same calm, calculated precision that had saved countless lives. By the time I picked up Max from chess club, my mind was racing with strategies, timelines, and contingencies. But when I saw him waiting at the curb with his chessboard tucked under his arm, his face lit up when he spotted me. I forced a smile and waved. How was the game today? I asked as he slid into the passenger seat. Good. I beat Jonas in the blitz round, he said, his pride unmistakable. Nice work, bud, I replied. Did you thank Coach for the session? Of course, he said, leaning back into the seat. Max always thrived on routines and structure, and I knew I needed to protect that for him. Whatever was about to unfold, I wasn't going to let it derail his progress or his stability. That night, after Max went to bed, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Rebecca's preliminary report. The numbers were damning. Marina had siphoned off tens of thousands of dollars from our joint accounts over the years, hiding the transactions in ways I never thought to question. I'd trusted her completely. While I was working overtime to provide for our family, she'd been planning her exit. My phone buzzed with an update from Rebecca. Tracking Sunday meetings now. We'll have footage by next week. I tapped out a quick reply. Keep me posted. Also, look into Hart's business records. Anything I can use to show his pattern. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about Sophie's words from the gazebo. How Marina had painted me as emotionally unavailable, too absorbed in my work to care about the family. It was a lie, but an effective one. Over the years, I'd sacrificed so much time at home to give them everything they needed. I thought I was doing the right thing. Marina had weaponized that sacrifice. The next morning, I called Megan Ruiz, a divorce attorney I'd heard about from a colleague. She had a reputation for being sharp, aggressive, and unshakable, exactly the kind of ally I needed. "Mr. Martin, I've reviewed the initial evidence from your investigator," she said during our first meeting. "Your wife's actions, using your inheritance, planning to remove the children from their schools, and attempting to conceal funds, are significant. Timing will be critical here." "How long do you need to prepare?" I asked. 2 weeks to fully document everything," Megan said. "In the meantime, don't let on that you know anything. Keep your routine as normal as possible. Any deviation could tip her off." I nodded, already planning how I'd juggle work, parenting, and covertly dismantling Marina's plans. After all, managing simultaneous crises was what I did best. Later that week, Rebecca sent me another update, this time including details about Hart's previous marriages. Both of his ex-wives had gone through eerily similar situations. He'd charmed them, built a picture-perfect family image, and then destroyed their lives when it suited him. His business dealings were just as messy: offshore accounts, fraudulent shell companies, and patterns of tax evasion. Rebecca was tracking it all, but the most damning discovery came when Rebecca handed me a photograph of Hart's children, James and Emily. Their mother, Teresa Fletcher, had lost custody during her divorce from Hart. According to court records, Hart had portrayed her as an unstable, career-driven mother who neglected her kids. It was the exact narrative Marina was starting to build about me. Rebecca had already reached out to Teresa. "She's interested in helping," Rebecca said. "Apparently, Hart put her through hell." Teresa met me at Rebecca's office a few days later. She was sharp and direct, her demeanor that of someone who had fought hard battles and come out the other side. "Your situation feels familiar," she said after introductions. "Hart has a pattern. He gets involved with married women, isolates them from their families, and uses their children as leverage. By the time you realize what's happening, he's already siphoned off your assets and set up his next move." "Not this time," I said firmly. "I'm documenting everything." She smiled. "Good. You'll need it. He's a master manipulator, and his lawyers are ruthless. But if you stay calm and focus on the facts, you can win." Her insights were invaluable. She shared details about how Hart had hidden assets during their divorce, manipulated the children, and used legal loopholes to avoid accountability. She even had evidence of his offshore accounts, which Rebecca quickly added to our growing case file. Meanwhile, I kept my routine steady. I picked Max up from chess club, attended Sophie's school events, and made small talk with Marina when our paths crossed at home. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. On Sundays, when she left with the kids for her charity work, I stayed back, documenting every moment she was gone. The recordings from the cameras I'd installed in the common areas of the house were particularly revealing. Marina was growing careless. I caught snippets of whispered phone calls, discussions about starting fresh, and even a few tense arguments with Hart. By the end of the week, Rebecca had compiled enough evidence to paint a clear picture. Marina and Hart were working together to not only take my children, but also drain my financial resources. Their arrogance was their weakness. They assumed I wouldn't notice until it was too late. They underestimated me. As I sat at my desk one evening, reviewing the growing pile of evidence, I felt a sense of clarity. For years, I'd been the rock, the steady presence that held everything together. Marina had mistaken my calm demeanor for passivity. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. This wasn't just about me. It was about Sophie and Max, about protecting them from the toxic web Marina and Hart were weaving, about ensuring they had a stable future, free from manipulation and betrayal. It was time to act. By the following week, my plan was taking shape. Rebecca's updates were coming in almost daily now, each one more damning than the last. Marina and Hart had been careless, overconfident. While I was working overtime to provide for our family, they'd left a trail of evidence a mile wide. Now all I had to do was piece it together. Rebecca handed me a new report during our next meeting. "Marina's been using your parents' inheritance to fund a house in Hart's Riverside Estates development," she said, sliding the documents across the table. "She forged your signature on several bank documents to make it happen." I stared at the papers, my jaw tightening. That money was supposed to be for Sophie and Max's college funds, their future. Marina had twisted it into a ticket for her escape. "And Hart?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Rebecca smirked. "His empire is starting to show cracks. Teresa Fletcher provided enough information about his offshore accounts to interest the IRS. If we time this right, we can hit him from every angle." She wasn't exaggerating. Teresa had been a goldmine of information. Her experience with Hart mirrored my own, right down to the manipulation of the children. She'd even provided me with court transcripts from her custody battle, evidence that Hart's legal team had a history of using underhanded tactics to win. But now, Hart was facing a different kind of opponent. I wasn't just a father fighting for his kids. I was an emergency dispatcher, someone who thrived under pressure, who could coordinate multiple crises without breaking a sweat. And this was just another crisis. The next Sunday, Marina left the house with Sophie and Max for what she claimed was another charity event. I stayed back, as usual, and waited for Rebecca's surveillance team to check in. At 11:47 a.m., I received a text. "At Riverside Estates. Kids in pool with Hart's children. Marina and Hart discussing move timeline on patio." I clenched my phone, resisting the urge to drive over there and confront them. Instead, I forwarded the message to Rebecca. Every interaction, every moment they spent weaving their web of lies was another piece of evidence for my case. Later that afternoon, Sophie returned home with a new energy I hadn't seen in months. She chatted excitedly about Emily, Hart's daughter, and the amazing house they'd spent the day at. "Dad, you should see the pool," she said, her eyes lighting up. "It's huge, and there's a game room with a pool table and everything." I forced a smile. "Sounds nice. Did you have fun?" "Yeah," she said, hesitating for a moment. "You know, Lawrence isn't that bad. He even asked about you." I kept my tone casual. "Oh? What did he say?" "Just that it must be hard for you, working so much," she said, avoiding my gaze. "He said he respects how hard you work for us." I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. Marina's manipulation was working. Hart was positioning himself as the understanding father figure, the antidote to the narrative Marina was spinning about me. That night, I reviewed the footage from the cameras I'd installed in the house. One clip stood out, a whispered conversation between Marina and Hart over the phone. "He's so predictable," Marina said, her tone smug. "I don't think he even suspects anything. Once the papers are served, it'll be too late for him to fight it." Hart chuckled on the other end. "Good. The sooner we finalize the move, the better. I've already started integrating the kids into our routines. They'll adapt." I stopped the recording and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Marina thought she had me figured out. She thought I was oblivious, too focused on work to see what was happening right under my nose. She couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, I met with Megan Ruiz to go over the latest evidence. She was impressed with the surveillance footage and financial records Rebecca had gathered. "This is more than enough to establish a pattern of parental alienation," Megan said, tapping on a file. "And the financial fraud? That's a nail in the coffin. The courts don't look kindly on parents who misuse joint assets." "What about Hart?" I asked. "Can we bring him into this?" "Absolutely," she said. "His involvement strengthens your case. We can argue that Marina's actions are part of a larger scheme orchestrated by Hart. His history with Teresa Fletcher will work in our favor." She paused, studying me. "How are the kids holding up?" I hesitated, thinking of Sophie's excitement about Hart's house and Max's quiet confusion. They're adapting. Marina's feeding them a lot of lies, but I think they're starting to see through it. Sophie's boyfriend, Tyler, has been recording some of the things Marina's said. He's worried about how she's manipulating her. Megan raised an eyebrow. Smart kid. Those recordings could be useful. Have Rebecca vet them for admissibility. I nodded, adding it to my growing list of tasks. Every piece of evidence mattered. Every detail could make the difference between protecting my children and losing them. By the end of the week, the groundwork was complete. Rebecca had tracked every Sunday meeting, every financial transaction, and every conversation Marina had with Hart. Teresa had provided a roadmap of Hart's tactics, and Megan had built a legal strategy that left no room for error. Marina had no idea that her carefully constructed plans were unraveling. She thought she was in control, but the truth was, I'd already taken the upper hand. This wasn't just about winning a custody battle or exposing Marina's lies. It was about protecting Sophie and Max from a life built on manipulation and deceit. And I was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure their future was safe. As I drove home that evening, the weight of the situation settled on my shoulders. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just reacting to Marina's betrayal anymore, I was taking control, and when the time came to act, I would be ready. I spent the next week executing my plan with the precision I'd honed during years at the dispatch center. Every call, every meeting, every move was calculated. Marina thought she was in control, but she didn't realize the trap was already closing around her. Rebecca's surveillance team sent over new footage from the most recent Sunday meeting. Sophie and Max were playing with Hart's kids in the backyard, while Marina and Hart sat on the patio. Their conversation was casual on the surface, but it was clear they were making plans. Once the papers are filed, we'll need to act fast, Hart said, his voice low. I don't want him having time to fight back. Don't worry, Marina replied with a smug smile. Clay's too busy with work to notice anything. He's always been predictable. I forwarded the footage to Megan with a note. Include in the custody case. Clear evidence of alienation and planning. Her response came back almost immediately. This is gold. Keep it coming. The next day, I reached out to Teresa Fletcher to follow up on Hart's business dealings. She had uncovered even more damning evidence of his financial fraud, including offshore accounts and fake shell companies. Lawrence is sloppy, Teresa said during our call. He's gotten away with this for so long, he doesn't even bother covering his tracks anymore. The IRS is already sniffing around, and when they come knocking, he'll throw anyone under the bus to save himself. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Marina had hitched her wagon to a sinking ship, and she didn't even know it yet. At home, I kept my routine as normal as possible. I didn't want to tip Marina off. I picked up Max from chess club, helped Sophie with her school projects, and acted like nothing was wrong. But the tension was palpable. Marina was distracted, spending more time on her phone and disappearing for hours on end. When she was home, she avoided me, as if sensing the growing distance between us. One night, as I was tucking Max into bed, he looked up at me with wide eyes. Dad, is something wrong? He asked. Why do you ask that, buddy? I replied, keeping my voice calm. Mom's been acting weird, he said. She keeps talking about moving to a new house, but she doesn't say anything about you coming with us. I sat down on the edge of his bed, my heart breaking at the confusion on his face. Max, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, I'm always going to be here for you and your sister, okay? You can talk to me about anything. He nodded, but his expression stayed troubled. I knew he didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could sense the shift in our family dynamic. It only strengthened my resolve to protect him and Sophie from the fallout. By the end of the week, Rebecca had finalized her investigation. The evidence was overwhelming. Marina had siphoned off thousands of dollars from our joint accounts, forged my signature on legal documents, and actively worked to alienate the kids from me. Hart's role in the scheme was equally damning, with his history of manipulation and financial fraud painting a clear picture of his intentions. Megan called me into her office to review the case. She had organized everything into a timeline that left no room for doubt. "This is airtight," she said, tapping on a folder. "We have financial records, surveillance footage, and even statements from Sophie's boyfriend and Hart's ex-wife. The courts won't look kindly on Marina's actions." "What's the next step?" I asked. "We served the divorce papers and file for an emergency custody hearing," Megan said. "Timing will be critical. We want to catch her off guard." I nodded, my mind already racing through the logistics. "What about Hart?" "He's about to have his own problems," Megan said with a sly smile. "The IRS is opening a formal investigation into his finances. Rebecca made sure the timing aligns perfectly with your case. That weekend I took Max to his chess tournament while Sophie stayed home with Marina. It was a rare moment of normalcy in the chaos, and I relished the chance to focus on something positive. Max won his match, and I couldn't have been prouder. On the drive home, he was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, do you think Mom wants us to move away?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Why do you say that?" I asked, careful not to show my reaction. "She's been talking about this new house a lot," he said, "and about how things will be different soon. But she never mentions you." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Max, no matter what happens, you and Sophie will always have a home with me. I promise." He nodded, but the weight of his question stayed with me. Marina's manipulation was starting to affect him, and I knew I needed to act soon. That night, I reviewed the plan with Megan and Rebecca. The timing was set. On Monday morning, Marina would be served with divorce papers. At the same time, the IRS would begin its investigation into Hart's finances, and all the evidence we'd gathered would be submitted to the court. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, it all came down to this. Marina thought she was in control, but she didn't realize I'd been planning my own response all along. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about protecting my children, my family, and the life I'd worked so hard to build. Marina and Hart had underestimated me, and now they were about to learn what happens when you push someone too far. Monday morning arrived, and I was ready. Marina had no idea what was about to hit her. The divorce papers were timed to be served while she was at the real estate office, ensuring maximum exposure and disruption. Simultaneously, Rebecca and Megan coordinated the release of our evidence to the court, the IRS, and Hart's business partners. At 10:00 a.m., I received the first confirmation text. Papers served. Marina's reaction noted. By 10:15 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Hart notified. Federal agents at Riverside Estates office. The pieces were falling into place exactly as planned. I stayed at work, outwardly calm, but my mind raced as I tracked every update. Rebecca's team reported that Marina was visibly shaken, scrambling to make calls as the reality of her situation set in. By noon, her bank accounts were frozen, thanks to the documentation of her unauthorized transfers. Her credit cards were declined when she attempted to withdraw cash. Her lifelines were severed. Meanwhile, the IRS began its investigation into Hart's finances. Teresa had been right. Hart's arrogance had made him careless, leaving a trail of fraudulent transactions that were impossible to ignore. His empire was crumbling, and he was already trying to shift the blame onto Marina. That afternoon, I picked up Max from chess club. He climbed into the car, his trophy from another successful match in his hands. His excitement was contagious, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax. "How'd it go?" I asked. "I won all 3 rounds, he said, grinning. "Coach says I might qualify for regionals." "Proud of you, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. Moments like these reminded me why I was fighting so hard. Max and Sophie deserved stability. a home free from lies and manipulation. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Marina's car wasn't there. She was usually home by now, but today her absence didn't surprise me. I figured she was still reeling from the shock of the day's events. By the time Sophie came home, Marina had left me a string of frantic voicemails. I didn't listen to them yet. Instead, I focused on dinner, asking the kids about their day and trying to keep things as normal as possible. Sophie seemed distracted, though, her eyes darting toward her phone every few minutes. Finally, after Max went upstairs to finish his homework, Sophie looked at me hesitantly. "Dad, can we talk?" "Of course," I said, gesturing for her to sit at the table. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. "It's about Mom and Lawrence." I leaned forward, keeping my tone calm. "Go on." She took a deep breath. I think Mom's been lying to us about a lot of things." Her words were like a weight lifting off my chest. "What makes you say that?" "Tyler recorded one of her phone calls," she admitted, her voice shaking. "He said it sounded bad, like she was planning something. I didn't believe him at first, but then I started noticing things. The way she talks about you when you're not around, the things she says about Lawrence, it didn't feel right." I placed a hand on hers. "Sophie, I'm glad you told me. This isn't your fault, okay? Your mom and I are going through something, but no matter what, I'll always be here for you and Max." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded. "I just want things to go back to normal." "Me too," I said softly. "And I promise, we'll get through this." The next day, Rebecca called with an update. "Hart's legal team is scrambling. The IRS froze his accounts and his business partners are turning on him. Marina's situation isn't much better. Her lawyer is already trying to negotiate." "Good," I said. "Keep the pressure on." Rebecca hesitated. "There's one more thing. Gabriella, Marina's sister, reached out. She wants to meet with you." That caught me off guard. Gabriella and Marina had always been close, and I doubted she'd want to get involved in our dispute. "What does she want?" "She says she has emails, proof that Marina and Hart were planning this for years. Apparently, she doesn't agree with what Marina's done." I considered this for a moment. "Set up a meeting. The more evidence we have, the better." Gabriella arrived at Rebecca's office the following afternoon, clutching a folder of printed emails. She looked nervous but determined. "I can't stay long," she said as she handed me the folder. "Marina can't know I was here." The emails were damning. Detailed plans for the move, custody arrangements, and financial transfers were spelled out in black and white. Marina's disdain for me was evident in her words, but what hurt the most was how casually she talked about the kids, as if they were pieces on a chessboard. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked, looking up at Gabriella. "Because it's wrong," she said firmly. "What she's doing to you, to the kids, it's not right. And Lawrence, he's using her, just like he used Teresa." I nodded, grateful for her honesty. "Thank you, Gabriella. This will make a difference." By the end of the week, Marina's carefully constructed world had fallen apart. Hart's assets were frozen, his reputation in shambles. Marina's family was turning against her, and her lawyer was scrambling to salvage what little leverage she had left. At home, I kept my focus on Sophie and Max. They were my priority, my reason for fighting. Marina and Hart had underestimated me, thinking I'd stay passive while they tore my family apart. They didn't realize I was just biding my time, gathering evidence and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment was now. The courthouse was quieter than I expected when I arrived for the emergency custody hearing. I sat in the waiting area with Megan, my attorney, as she reviewed the mountain of evidence we'd compiled. Across the room, Marina was huddled with her lawyer, her expression tense. Her confidence from weeks ago had been replaced with nervous glances and whispered conversations. "You've got this," Megan said, her voice steady. "The evidence is on your side. Just stay calm and let the facts speak for themselves." I nodded, forcing myself to take a deep breath. Years of training as a dispatcher had taught me how to maintain composure under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't just about me. This was about Sophie and Max, their future, and ensuring they were protected from the chaos Marina had created. The bailiff called our case, and we filed into the courtroom. Judge Eleanor Martinez presided over the hearing, her sharp gaze cutting through the room. She wasted no time, diving straight into the heart of the matter. "Mr. Martin," she began, "your petition for emergency custody includes allegations of financial fraud, parental alienation, and unauthorized attempts to relocate the children. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" Megan stood, presenting the first set of documents. "Your Honor, we've submitted financial records showing that Mrs. Martin transferred significant sums of money from joint accounts without Mr. Martin's knowledge. These funds were used to secure a property in Mr. Hart's development. Additionally, we have surveillance footage and recorded conversations demonstrating her attempts to alienate the children from their father." The judge reviewed the documents in silence, her expression unreadable. Marina's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Martinez silenced him with a sharp look. "Mrs. Martin," the judge said, turning to Marina, "would you care to explain these transactions?" Marina's voice wavered as she tried to defend herself. I was trying to secure a better future for my children. Clay was always so busy with work, and I felt like I had no choice." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And Mr. Hart's involvement in this better future? How do you justify that?" Marina faltered, her carefully rehearsed narrative crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Megan seized the opportunity, presenting the emails Gabriella had provided. They laid out Marina's plans in explicit detail, from manipulating the kids to siphoning money for the move. The most damning moment came when Teresa Fletcher took the stand. She recounted her own experience with Hart, painting a vivid picture of his manipulative tactics. "Lawrence isolates women from their support systems," she said, her voice steady. "He positions himself as the hero while dismantling their existing relationships. I've seen this pattern before, and I believe he's doing the same thing to Mr. Martin's family." Marina's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed Teresa's testimony to stand, citing its relevance to Hart's involvement in the case. Finally, it was my turn. I took the stand, recounting the sacrifices I'd made for my family, the betrayal I'd uncovered, and the steps I'd taken to protect my children. Megan guided me through the key points, ensuring the judge understood the full scope of Marina's actions. "Mr. Martin," Megan said, "how has this situation affected your children?" I took a deep breath. "Sophie and Max deserve stability and honesty. They've been caught in the middle of something they didn't ask for. My goal is to provide them with a safe, loving environment where they can thrive without manipulation or deceit." When Marina's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as an absentee father, someone too consumed by work to be present for his kids. But Megan had prepared me for this. I calmly recounted the sacrifices I'd made to support my family, from working extra shifts to attending every chess tournament and school event I could. "My job is demanding," I admitted, "but it's always been about providing for my family. I've never missed an important moment in my children's lives, and I never will." The hearing concluded with the judge reviewing the final pieces of evidence: surveillance footage of Marina's meetings with Hart, financial records showing her unauthorized transfers, and statements from Sophie and Max detailing the pressure Marina had put on them. When Judge Martinez finally spoke, her voice was firm. "This court finds in favor of Mr. Martin. Full custody of the children is awarded to their father, with Mrs. Martin's visitation subject to supervision and review." A wave of relief washed over me, but I didn't let it show. I stayed composed as Marina's lawyer whispered furiously to her, and she sat there, stunned and silent. Outside the courthouse, I met Teresa and Rebecca to thank them for their support. Teresa handed me a letter from James and Emily, Hart's children. "They wanted you to have this," she said. "They're relieved to be out of Lawrence's shadow, and they're grateful you fought back." I opened the letter later that night. James and Emily apologized for the role their father had played in my family's turmoil and offered their support. It was a small but powerful gesture, proof that Hart's hold on his children was finally broken. At home, Sophie and Max greeted me with cautious smiles. They didn't know the full details of the hearing, but they sensed the shift. Over dinner, I reassured them that everything would be okay, that we'd face whatever came next together. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope. The battle wasn't over. Marina and Hart would likely retaliate in some way. But the tide had turned. I had won the first and most critical fight, protecting my children. The days following the custody hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Marina's world was unraveling, and the fallout was everywhere. I kept my focus on Sophie and Max, ensuring they stayed grounded amidst the chaos. Sophie was opening up more, and Max seemed to relax, knowing the uncertainty was fading. Marina, however, wasn't going down quietly. It started with a tearful interview on the local news. I saw it while sitting in the break room at work. Marina's face filled the screen, her eyes red-rimmed as she delivered a carefully rehearsed monologue. "My husband is manipulative," she said, her voice trembling. "He's turned my children against me and fabricated evidence to destroy my reputation. I just want to be there for my kids." Andrea, my colleague, muted the TV. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "After everything she's done, she's playing the victim?" Kayla, who had become one of my closest allies during this ordeal, stood nearby with arms crossed. "No one's buying it," she said firmly. "The truth always comes out." I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. Marina's attempts to spin the narrative didn't surprise me, but they still stung. Her lies were meant to paint me as the villain and sway public opinion. What she didn't realize was that I had prepared for this too. The community response to Marina's interview was swift, and not in her favor. Parents from Max's chess club, Sophie's school, and even my colleagues at the dispatch center rallied around me. Tyler's family, who had been supportive throughout, publicly shared their own account of Marina's manipulations. She tried to poison Sophie against her dad, Tyler's mom wrote on social media, but Sophie saw through it. Clay Martin is one of the most dedicated fathers I've ever met. Marina's sister, Gabriella, dealt the final blow. Frustrated by Marina's continued lies, she released years of emails that exposed Marina's calculated destruction of our marriage. The emails detailed her financial schemes, her plans to alienate me from the kids, and her growing obsession with Hart's promises of a new life. "My sister isn't a victim," Gabriella told the same news station that aired Marina's interview. "She's a manipulator. Clay worked himself to exhaustion for his family while Marina planned to steal his children." Meanwhile, Hart was facing his own reckoning. The IRS investigation had unearthed decades of fraud, and his business partners were quick to distance themselves from him. Teresa kept me updated, her tone tinged with satisfaction every time she shared a new development. "Lawrence is throwing everyone under the bus to save himself," she said during one of our calls. "But it's not working. His empire is finished." Hart's children, James and Emily, took to social media to publicly denounce their father. "We've seen this pattern before," Emily wrote. "He destroys families for sport, and we refuse to be part of it anymore." Their post went viral, sparking a wave of support for families affected by manipulation and betrayal. It was poetic justice. Hart's own children had become his undoing. At home, Sophie and Max were adjusting to the changes. Sophie started volunteering at a local crisis center, using her experiences to help other teens navigate difficult family situations. Max poured himself into chess, his focus sharper than ever. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Sophie spoke up. "Dad, I want to apologize," she said, her voice wavering, "for believing some of the things Mom said about you. I didn't know how much she was lying." I leaned forward, placing a hand on hers. "You don't need to apologize, Sophie. None of this is your fault. I'm just glad you're here with me now." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded. I'm glad we still have you. Max chimed in from his spot on the couch. Me too. You're the only one who never lied to us. Their words hit me harder than I expected, and I had to take a moment to compose myself. Everything I'd done, the planning, the fighting, the sacrifices, had been for them. Hearing their trust reaffirmed made it all worth it. The professional fallout for Marina and Hart was swift and severe. Marina's real estate career was effectively over. The ethics board was investigating her involvement in fraudulent transactions, and no one wanted to work with someone whose lies had been so publicly exposed. Hart, meanwhile, was left scrambling to salvage what little he could. His frozen accounts, pending criminal charges, and public disgrace made it impossible for him to maintain the facade of success. Teresa's legal team ensured he faced consequences for his actions, and I took some satisfaction in knowing he'd finally been held accountable. Kayla stopped by my office at work one afternoon, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You've been quiet today," she said, handing me one of the mugs. "Just reflecting," I replied. "It's been a long road, but I think we're finally seeing the end of it," she smiled. "You deserve this. You've fought harder than anyone I know, and you've kept your integrity intact." That's rare. Her words stayed with me. Through it all, the lies, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, I'd stayed true to who I was. Marina and Hart had underestimated me, thinking I'd crumble under the pressure, but they didn't understand what years of managing crises had taught me. Stay calm, stay focused, and never lose sight of what matters most. That evening, I gathered Sophie and Max in the kitchen to celebrate. It wasn't a grand occasion, just pizza, ice cream, and laughter, but it felt like a victory. For the first time in months, our home felt lighter, free from the tension that had hung over us. As I watched my kids laugh and joke with each other, I knew we'd turned a corner. The battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, but for now, we were safe. And that was enough. The dust had finally settled, and life began to take on a new rhythm. Sophie and Max were thriving, each finding their way through the chaos and coming out stronger on the other side. My focus was on rebuilding, not just for them, but for myself as well. Marina had moved to Arizona, her reputation in ruins. Her attempts to reconnect with Sophie and Max were met with polite distance from Sophie and outright silence from Max. They'd seen through her manipulations and were no longer swayed by her words. I didn't celebrate her downfall. There was no joy in watching the mother of my children unravel, but I couldn't deny the relief I felt, knowing she could no longer hurt them or me. Hart's fall had been even more spectacular. The IRS investigation revealed years of tax fraud, shell companies, and offshore accounts. His former business partners, led by Stephen Fry, turned state's evidence to save themselves, leaving Hart to face the full weight of the law. I heard through Teresa that he was living in a small apartment, his once luxurious lifestyle reduced to nothing. His children, James and Emily, had cut ties with him completely. Emily had started studying psychology, focusing on family trauma, while James had become an advocate for financial literacy. Both had turned their father's betrayal into a mission to help others. It was a satisfying ending, one Hart had earned through his greed and manipulation. Meanwhile, my life was taking a turn I hadn't anticipated. Kayla, my colleague and confidant throughout this ordeal, had become more than just a friend. What started as quiet support had grown into something deeper, something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine during the chaos. One evening, as we worked together on a training protocol for the dispatch center, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with a small smile. "You know, you're different now." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Lighter," she said. "Like you've finally let go of the weight you've been carrying." I thought about that for a moment. She wasn't wrong. For the first time in years, I felt free. not just from Marina's betrayal, but from the guilt and self-doubt I'd carried since this all began. Maybe I have, I admitted, and maybe that's thanks to you. Her smile widened, and in that moment, I realized I was ready to start a new chapter. Not just for myself, but for my kids, too. At home, Sophie had thrown herself into her volunteer work at the crisis center. Her experiences had given her a unique perspective, and she was determined to help other teens navigate difficult family situations. She'd even started talking about pursuing a career in social work. "Mrs. Anderson at the center wants you to come speak again," she told me one evening. "Your last talk really helped the group." "Of course," I said. "Anything for you." Max, meanwhile, had climbed the ranks in the chess world, earning a spot in the national rankings. His focus and strategic mind reminded me of myself, and I couldn't have been prouder. One evening, he approached me with his chessboard in hand. "Dad, can we go over some endgame strategies? Coach says I need to sharpen my finishing moves." I grinned. "You bet." As we worked through the game, I realized how much he'd grown, not just as a player, but as a person. He'd faced so much uncertainty over the past year, but he'd come out of it stronger, more determined. The dispatch center had changed too. My fight against automation had earned national attention, and my training protocols were being adopted across the country. Departments were recognizing the value of the human element in emergency response, and I'd been invited to lead a national task force on the issue. It was a career milestone I hadn't anticipated, but one I embraced. The work felt meaningful, a way to turn my own challenges into something that could help others. The holiday season brought a new sense of normalcy. Our annual gathering at home included Teresa and her kids, Tyler's family, and even a few of the people Sophie and I had helped through our respective work. The house was filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of genuine connections that Marina and Hart had tried to destroy. As we sat around the tree, Max proudly displayed his latest chess trophy, while Sophie shared stories from the crisis center. Kayla's daughter, Emma, had become part of the family, her bond with Max and Sophie growing stronger every day. I looked around the room, taking it all in. The betrayal, the lies, and the fights were behind us now. What remained was a family rebuilt on trust, love, and resilience. Years later, the Martin Protocol, a method I'd developed during my fight, was being used nationwide to protect families in similar situations. Attorneys, therapists, and even judges cited it as a gold standard for handling cases of parental alienation and financial fraud. I'd turned my experience into a blueprint for others, ensuring no one else would face what we had without tools to fight back. Sophie had become a licensed social worker, running her own program for teens dealing with family manipulation. Max had achieved his dream of becoming a chess grandmaster, using his platform to inspire others. And Kayla and I had built a life together, blending our families into something stronger than I ever thought possible. One evening, as I reviewed applications for the latest dispatch training cohort, I found a familiar name, Stephen Fry's daughter. The note attached explained how my story had inspired her to pursue a career in emergency response. It was a full-circle moment, a reminder of how far we'd come. As I closed my office for the night, my phone buzzed with a message from Max. "Just won another match. Thanks for teaching me how to think ahead. Love you, Dad." I smiled, my heart full. The price of loyalty had been high, but the rewards were immeasurable. From the ashes of betrayal, we'd built something unshakable, a legacy of resilience, integrity, and love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Here's the next story. A storm simmered silently beneath the warm warmth of our ideal home. Clara's laughter once illuminated my world, but now it resonated with deception. Adam Miller, our lovely neighbor with the slick automobile and confident grin, was more than just a welcoming presence. A kiss beside the lake broke everything: my trust, my love, and my life. They assumed I didn't know. They assumed I wouldn't act. but secrets decay, and betrayal requires justice. What started as murmurs became my weapon. Their lies will be exposed, their world will crumble, and I'll stand in the wreckage, calm and cold. This is not simply vengeance, this is balance. The afternoon sun seeped through the thick pine trees that lined the lake's summer side, casting a beautiful dapple of light and shadow across the well-kept lawns. It was late summer, and the weather was still pleasant, but fall was not far away. If you breathed deeply in this small lakeside village, you may smell the faint scent of dry leaves. Everyone recognized each other's faces, if not their names. The Cross family home was no different than the others around it. A modest two-story house with off-white siding, a clean front porch, and potted geraniums. Clara watered every other morning. It felt comfortable and ordinary, which made what was about to happen much more disturbing. Ethan Cross stood in the driveway, squinting slightly, admiring the effort he had put into repainting the porch railing. Earlier that week, he acquired the hardware store from his late father 5 years ago and has learnt a variety of trades and tactics along the road. He was well known around town for his ability to mend practically anything. A creaking hinge, a wobbly floorboard, or a stubborn lawnmower engine. Ethan generally had a solution. He had always been solid and quietly ambitious, if not in a spectacular way. He preferred routine and dependability. The impression of knowing tomorrow would be very similar to today. Clara was inside the house preparing for a small dinner party, humming gently to herself as she placed an array of appetizers, including prosciutto-wrapped cantaloupe, a plate of cubed cheddar and Gouda, and some olives in a tiny dish she enjoyed hosting. She enjoyed people. Clara worked as an interior designer, taking on assignments from homeowners looking to renovate their kitchens or convert extra rooms into offices. She was outgoing, artistic, and had a certain spark that drew others in. Ethan had recently realized that her spark was being focused elsewhere, but he couldn't pinpoint the source. He chalked it up to restlessness. Perhaps she wanted larger projects or a trip out of town. Still, there was a tension in the air, which he was only now becoming aware of. Tonight's dinner party was casual. They'd asked Adam Miller, who lived a few houses down near the lake. Adam, a real estate entrepreneur in his mid-40s, had recently relocated to the area and purchased a couple lakefront houses. He was wealthy than most others around, with a flashy automobile and a confident laugh. Clara had noted Adam's keen sense of spatial awareness several times. Ethan at the moment liked small compliments. He wasn't naturally jealous, but there was something about Adam's grin, the way it stayed just a little too long, that Ethan found slightly annoying. Mrs. Larkin, a widowed 10-year-old chatterbox, and Mr. Young, a quiet accountant who rented a modest cottage next door, were also in attendance. They were more of a supporting cast than close friends, but their presence made the occasion feel more like a neighborhood gathering than a private supper. Clara reasoned that having a few more visitors would keep the conversation lively. By 6:30, the living room was filled with the aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes. Ethan had opened a bottle of Pinot Noir, and Clara had prepared the table with casual elegance linen napkins, polished silverware, and simple cream-colored plates. The sound of a car door closing outside was followed by a gentle knock on the door. Clara cleaned her hands on a dish towel before answering. We welcomed Mrs. Larkin, who brought a tiny bouquet of daisies, and Mr. Young, who presented a bottle of sparkling water. Come in, Clara urged cheerfully. We're almost ready. Make yourself comfy. Ethan is opening wine in the kitchen. Mrs. Larkin walked inside, her perfume lovely and powdery. Your garden looks gorgeous. As always, she added, lowering her voice to a whisper Clara could still hear clearly. I noticed Adam park his car. That was quite fancy. Mr. Young nodded quietly as usual and took off his loafers at the entrance. Clara grinned when she saw Ethan across the kitchen. He nodded politely and calmly as he poured the wine. Moments later, another knock. Clara opened the door to see Adam smiling and relaxed, dressed in casual slacks and a neat blue polo. He carried a tiny box of handmade chocolates from a nearby boutique. Clara thanked him, and Adam welcomed everyone inside with a hearty greeting. Ethan felt his chest constrict, subtle, but present. Adam gave Clara a quick kiss on the cheek as a hello. Perhaps nothing. Nonetheless, Ethan's stare lingered. He tried not to overreact, but Adam's presence made him nervous. He was too cozy and familiar. Ethan attempted a slight smile. In a town this small, a neighborly kiss could be harmless. He shoved the notion away. They gathered in the living room. Small conversation floats around like fireflies, harmless snippets of gossip. Mrs. Larkin gushed over her granddaughter's approaching wedding. Mr. Young commented on rising property taxes, and Adam laughed about trying to fix up one of his lakeside rentals. Clara sat on the arm of a chair. She held a glass of wine in her hand and periodically met Adam's gaze with a brighter expression. Ethan saw he attempted to engage Adam and discuss the real estate market. Adam responded pleasantly, in a friendly tone, although his gaze occasionally shifted to Clara. It was subtle, but Ethan's heart sped up. At dinner, everyone sat around the table. The chat was simple at start. Local events, a recent arts fair, the best sites for fishing from the dock. Clara inquired about Adam's next endeavor, leaning slightly forward. Ethan cut the chicken and caught a glimpse of Clara's keen, attentive expression, as if she was hanging on every word Adam spoke. It caused Ethan's jaw to clench. He looked at Mrs. Larkin and Mr. Young, wondering if they'd noticed anything. Mrs. Larkin was too preoccupied admiring the seasoning on the potatoes. Mr. Young looked down as he stirred his wine absent-mindedly. If they observed something unusual, they did not display it. The supper passed without incident, but Ethan's mood had changed. He was no longer completely relaxed in his own home. Clara's homemade apple tart followed the dessert. The visitors departed in a frenzy of handshakes and goodbyes. Adam was the last to leave, pausing at the door to thank Clara for a beautiful evening. The home became quiet again. Clara started clearing dishes off the table. Ethan volunteered to help, but she stated she had it under control and he should relax. Ethan stood in the hallway, staring at the picture frames hung there. One was from their wedding ceremony years ago. They appeared joyful at the time, but uncertain about their future together. He wondered if something had changed, or if he had always been overly trusting. It occurred to him that he was overthinking things, but as he walked the stairs to take a shower before bed, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had crept over him like a persistent chill. Life resumed its normal course a few days ago. Ethan spent a lot of time at the hardware store, which was a tiny family-run business that sold everything from nails and paint cans to specialty fasteners for the local boat docks. He enjoyed talking to clients, many of whom he knew by first name. If something weighed on his mind, he was skilled at concealing it. He had a polite, tranquil demeanor, almost like a uniform. I smiled at Mrs. O'Connor when she came in for a new garden hose and nodded to Mark Hayes, who needed a replacement part for his lawnmower. He was on autopilot, but his mind strayed back to Clara and Adam Miller. "Ethan, you okay?" asked one of the part-time employees. "A young man just out of college. He was organizing paintbrushes on a shelf." Ethan startled out of his daze. "Yeah, I am fine. Just something on my thoughts. How does the stock look?" "Everything was fine," Terry said. "However, you appear to be distracted." Ethan mustered a smile. "It was a long week, that's all. Keep up the wonderful work." If Terry had any more suspicions, he kept them hidden. Ethan went to the cashier and browsed through bills, but he kept seeing that lingering eye contact from the dinner party. He reminded himself that it might signify nothing. Clara, meanwhile, was preoccupied with her design job. She had set up a little office in the attic room, where the sloped ceiling provided a comfortable atmosphere. She worked on drawings for kitchens, living rooms, and even full floor plans for restorations. It was a little company with just her, a laptop, some design software, and a library of swatches and samples carefully organized in labeled bins. She had a few current projects, the most of which Ethan was aware of since she discussed them at breakfast or during nighttime walks. However, she had just mentioned a new employment project in passing, which involved interior design. She did not go into detail. Ethan remembered her stating it casually over coffee. "I might have a new client who is still in exploratory talks. Nothing is set in stone yet." He nodded and did not pursue further at the time. Now, he realized she hadn't spoken anything since. Ethan arrived home from the hardware shop early one day, expecting to surprise Clara and possibly take her out to dinner. When he stepped inside, he noticed that the home was quiet. Clara's car was in the driveway, so she must be at home. He called her name quietly and received no response. Probably upstairs working. He climbed the stairs and made his way to the attic office. The door was ajar. He could hear the gentle scratching of a pencil against paper and the rustle of pages. Before knocking, he paused. Clara's voice, a low murmur, flowed through the room. She was on the phone, speaking softly, as if she didn't want to be heard. Ethan captured snippets and considered a more open layout. "Yes, I understand how important the viewpoint is." Her tone was cheerful but subdued. The conversation concluded quickly. Ethan knocked lightly. "Hello, Clara, I'm home early." She was startled and looked up from her desk. "Oh, you scared me." She smiled, but her eyes appeared guarded. "How was it at work?" "Good." Ethan said it was normal stuff. "I wondered if we could go out for an early dinner tonight." Clara hesitated. "I currently have a lot on my plate." "Perhaps another night." He nodded, trying not to express disappointment. "Sure, not a problem." He left her to work and went downstairs. Something in him is growing heavier. Clara had never been secretive about her projects. Usually she was eager to share information. Why was there such silence if this was a new client? Clara decided to run errands around town the next morning, which was a Saturday. Ethan took the opportunity to clean up the house. He moved methodically from room to room, dusting, organizing mail, and wiping down counters. He entered Clara's office with the intention of simply tidying the desk. He knew it was a minor invasion of privacy, but he told himself he was just curious about what was keeping her so occupied. Clara's desk was organized, with her laptop, a few design magazines, and a stack of folders. Nothing suspicious, just a few loose sketches sticking out of a manila folder. Ethan recognized the meticulous pencil lines and inked annotations as her work. Clara was meticulous and talented. He lifted the top sketch, expecting to see a typical living room redesign. Instead, he noticed a floor plan that appeared familiar. It took him a moment to realize why it looked like Adam Miller's lakeside cottage, the one near the water's edge. Everyone in town was familiar with that property. Adam had mentioned it during the dinner party. But why would Clara have such a detailed design for it? Ethan frowned. Adam's cottage was not up for sale. He had not mentioned any renovations, not publicly, anyhow. Yet here it was, a proposed new layout with alterations to the living room and proposals for enlarging the kitchen window to get a greater view of the lake. Clara's handwriting contains detailed notes. Check the window frame type. Consider salvaged wood floors. Discuss budget with A. Adam's budget will be discussed. His heart fell. Clara had not informed him that she was working with Adam. If it was only a business project, why the secrecy? Usually she would say, "I received a new client." Guess who? Adam Miller, can you believe it? She enjoys sharing her triumphs, particularly with her neighbors. But she didn't. Ethan carefully placed the sketches back where he found them, ensuring that everything appeared undisturbed. He strolled down to the living room, feeling if the world had shifted slightly. He remembered Clara's gaze at Adam, and how Adam lingered at the door after the dinner party. He disliked the way the pieces began to fit together. It was not only the sketch. Clara's newfound distance, her uncommon secrecy, the late-night calls, and the quiet anxiety in the house were all minor details. Ethan felt as if someone had ignited a fuse inside him. He wanted to address her right immediately and ask what the heck was going on. But something stopped him. He realized that if Clara was having an affair with Adam, a forthright confrontation would just push the truth deeper underground. She could lie, deny, and flip things around on him. He didn't want to give her the chance. Ethan chose to watch, wait, and gather information. He might be the type of man who values honesty and directness, but in this case, he suspected he needed to be patient and crafty. He only wanted the truth. He asked her to pay, if this is what he suspects. It was love he had felt. The trust he had developed with her was changing into something darker. He felt misled and embarrassed. He'd given her everything, and if she threw it away for a thrill with Adam, he'd punish her for the rest of the day. Ethan performed his responsibilities methodically. He helped a neighbor repair a loose fence board. He trimmed the hedges in the front yard. He behaved normally, as if nothing was wrong. Inside, his mind was racing with thoughts. He would not blame her, but he would do better than that. He would gather evidence and ensure they both understood what it was like to be caught and exposed. Clara returned home early in the evening, carrying bags of shopping. She was nice as usual, asking how his day had gone. He watched her intently and responded politely and simply. If she had any suspicions, she kept them to herself. They had a calm meal of plain sandwiches and salad. Clara threw together. The talk was light. The weather. The forthcoming town festival. Ethan reported hearing that Adam was working on another property purchase near the lake. His voice was nonchalant. Clara nodded, giving little information. She said something non-committal, as if it was what he did, right? And turned the conversation to the farmer's market, which opens next Saturday. That night, I lay on my bed. Ethan stared at the ceiling as Clara slept. He imagined Adam and Clara laughing together, possibly meeting in the cottage, talking about design elements, sharing something more personal than just business. The thought made his stomach turn. He needed to be assured before he acted. He wouldn't rely on one sketch. He would find a way to prove it beyond a doubt. In the coming days, he would pay closer attention to Clara's schedule. He would keep track of how often she went out, how long did she stay gone, and he'd notice the slightest changes in her behavior. Ethan has spent his life mending things and solving mysteries. This was simply another puzzle, but significantly more agonizing than a malfunctioning lawnmower. He'd work it out piece by piece. Outside, a soft breeze shook the big oak leaves. The community slept soundly, ignorant of the calm storm gathering in the Cross household. Ethan closed his eyes, determined to go cautiously. In this community, secrets may be hidden behind sunny grins. They did, however, eventually make their way to the surface. And when they did, he planned to be prepared. The morning light seeped through the bedroom blinds, collecting dust motes that drifted slowly. Ethan lay awake before the alarm went off, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Clara slept alongside him. Her breathing was steady and peaceful. If he turned his head, he could see her face was calm, almost innocent, but he kept his sight locked on the little break in the plaster above. Thinking about what he'd discovered, that interior design plan for Adam's cottage, and the subtle signals that something else was going on. He felt a knot build in his stomach, tight and relentless. Clara stirred, but Ethan had already showered and dressed. He put on a faded t-shirt and pants, standard clothes for another day at Cross Hardware. Clara rolled over and squinted at him. "You're awake early," she whispered, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Yeah." Ethan spoke in a calm tone. "I received some delivery this morning. I figured I would get a head start." Lie. There were no earlier deliveries scheduled. He merely wanted the store to be quiet before the customers arrived. He needed space to think. Clara nodded lazily and got out of bed. I will make coffee, downstairs. Clara had started buying lavender dish soap, and the kitchen smelled faintly of it. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun as she measured coffee grinds into the machine. Ethan eyed her out of the corner of his eye. Her motions were leisurely, normal. If she was hiding something, she was doing an excellent job. He wondered how long this had been going on. How many secrets did they keep under this particular roof? Want some toast? She inquired. Opening the bread box? Sure, he said. Thanks. They ate silently around the kitchen table. She reminded him of a communal yard sale next weekend. I'm considering clearing away some old chairs from the attic. Perhaps that carpeting in the guest room, too. The one we've never used. Yes, it is an excellent concept, Ethan responded. He attempted to read between the lines of her remarks. There was nothing clear about her motions. It was just another ordinary morning in a typical household. But it wasn't normal anymore. Not to him. When Ethan arrived, Cross Hardware was quiet. He turned on the lights, flipped the closed sign to open, and began refilling shelves around 9 o'clock. The first customer arrived, an elderly man looking for a replacement blade for his hedge trimmer. A teen girl buys paint for a summer painting project. He talked to them, managed a smile or two, and did the customary things. But part of his thoughts was somewhere else. Terry, the part-time worker, arrived around mid-morning, sipping coffee and appearing more awake than the previous time Ethan had seen him. Terry greeted the boss pleasantly before heading to the back to check inventories. Ethan nodded. Morning. A few moments later, a familiar face strolled in. Mrs. Larkin is the local chatterbox. She wore a pale green cardigan. Despite the warm weather, she was carrying a tote bag, which was most likely stuffed with coupons and miscellaneous knickknacks. She greeted Ethan with a big smile. Do you have any solar-powered garden lighting in stock? My neighbor told me you acquired some new ones. Ethan directed her toward the aisle. Yeah, we received a cargo last week. They are over here. Mrs. Larkin studied the lights. She lowered her voice and commented, I haven't seen your wife around much lately. Is she working on new projects? Her speech carried a sense of curiosity and gossip. Ethan shrugged casually. She has been working on something. But you know, Clara is constantly juggling ideas. Mrs. Larkin's eyes gleamed. I heard Adam Miller is cleaning up one of his villas. Someone mentioned that he might be working with a designer. Who do you think that might be? She shot him a pointed glance. Her eyebrows rose as if she already knew the answer. Ethan attempted a slight smile. Mrs. Larkin, it might be anyone. He has the money to hire anybody he wants. The older woman nodded, apparently dissatisfied, but did not press further. She grabbed a box of lights and approached the cashier. After she went, Ethan leaned against the counter and exhaled softly. The entire town was a network of whispers. He wondered if Clara understood how quickly secrets may be revealed. Perhaps she did. And it made her cautious, but not overly cautious. That evening, after closing the store, Ethan decided to go for a walk. The sun was low in the sky, creating lengthy shadows on the walkways. He wandered aimlessly through a few back streets before heading for the lake. He told himself he was just enjoying the weather, but in reality he was hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that would confirm his suspicion. Where would Clara and Adam meet? Near the water. The air smelled fresh and slightly briny. The leaves of the old willow trees along the shore rustled softly. He walked down a narrow path that led behind some properties, including Adam's cottage. Adam's place was clean and modern, with large windows overlooking the lake. Ethan paused at a location partially obscured by shrubs. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe Clara is stepping out. Maybe Adam is returning from a late meeting. He stood there for a few minutes, trying to remain calm, but nothing changed. Only stillness. He returned home, disappointed, but determined not to give up. Patience. He reminded himself that he would confirm this beyond a doubt. The next few days unfolded in slow motion. Ethan paid close attention to Clara's schedule. She mentioned going into town to meet a potential client for lunch, but when he casually inquired about who it was, she avoided the question. Another time, she mentioned that she needed to pick up some design samples from a supplier in the next town. She seemed eager to leave the house on certain afternoons, dressing a little nicer than usual. Ethan took mental notes, piecing together her absences. Still nothing solid. He also had conversations with June, the waitress at the local diner, whenever he needed coffee or a quick sandwich. June was kind-hearted and inquisitive. She'd ask, "How is your life going?" Ethan, in a way that made him believe she truly cared. In response, he'd make a few cryptic remarks about things, feeling uneasy at home without naming names. June occasionally mentioned things she overheard from other customers, such as people discussing Adam's business or Clara's name coming up in passing. June never asked why Ethan was interested. She probably assumed he was only concerned about his wife's work. Stress. One afternoon, Ethan decided to push a little further. He stopped by the diner during the late afternoon lull, when only a few customers were scattered across booths. June replenished his coffee. "Slow day?" he asked. "Yeah." The lunch rush was nothing special, she explained, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How about you?" He swirled his coffee. "I've been thinking about selling the hardware business," he explained. He was testing the waters with one of the cover stories he planned to use on Adam. Just looking into options. June's eyes widened. "Really? You've had that store for several years." Ethan shrugged, just looking ahead. "Have you heard about any real estate deals going on? If I sell, I want to get a fair price." June pursed her lips. "I know Adam Miller's name comes up frequently. People think he wants to expand his estates by the lake. Maybe he knows a thing or two." Ethan nodded, faking casual interest. "Maybe I'll ask him sometime." June removed a crumb from the countertop with a moist towel. "He comes by here every now and then. On Fridays, you might run into him." Ethan filed it aside. If Adam stopped by on Fridays, he could schedule his own visits to get more information. The strategy to befriend Adam was emerging. For now, he thanked June, gave a generous tip, and left that Friday after lunch. Ethan entered the diner and slid into a booth with a clear view of the door. He'd informed Clara that he might be home late due to inventory concerns at the business. She barely questioned him. Just, "Okay, let me know if you require assistance." He told her everything was under control. He couldn't stop feeling an ache. She used to volunteer to stop by, bring coffee, show interest. It was like they were both traveling in different currents. He requested coffee and a slice of pie. June gave him a questioning smile, but said little. About 20 minutes later, Adam entered. He looked as confident as ever, dressed in a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and slacks that probably cost more than Ethan's entire wardrobe. Adam recognized Ethan, nodded, and approached. "Hey, mind if I join?" Adam asked casually as if they were old friends. "Not at all." Ethan replied with a warm smile. He motioned Adam to sit. Adam leaned back in the booth after ordering an espresso. "So, what brought you here on a Friday afternoon?" Ethan shrugged. "Slow day at the store. I was thinking about the future and considering making some adjustments. I figured I'd treat myself to some pie and think things through." Adam smiled. "Changes? Like what?" "Well," Ethan began to choose his words carefully. "I'm considering selling the hardware store. It's been in my family for a long time, but I'm looking at different choices. I wondered whether I might speak with someone who had experience in property and business." Adam's eyes brightened up. "I would be pleased to offer advice. Real estate is my game, after all." He leaned forward. "You know, the market around here is interesting. Lakefront properties are currently in high demand." Ethan nodded slowly. He let Adam discuss market trends, investments, and the prospects for flipping older buildings. He listened closely, occasionally asking questions to maintain Adam's attention. After a while, Adam appeared satisfied with himself. He had attracted an audience when Ethan paid the bill. Adam touched his shoulder. "If you are serious about selling, we should discuss more shortly. I might know someone who is interested in a small business like yours." "I appreciate it," Ethan remarked, smiling nicely. "I will be in touch." Outside. Ethan moved towards his pickup. I feel both relieved and tense. He had taken the initiative, opened the door to Adam's universe. If Adam trusted him or saw him as a potential ally, Ethan might find out more about what he was hiding and what Clara was hiding. Over the next few days, Ethan began to drop subtle hints about Adam in Clara's presence. Casual mentions such as running into Adam at a diner or Adam saying something insightful about the market. Clara responded with mild astonishment, but did not inquire further. She appeared nervous every time Adam's name came up, as if she was battling to retain her cool. Clara informed me on Tuesday evening that she needed to meet a client at a lakeside cafe. Ethan pretended to be checking some store paperwork at home. After Clara left, Ethan waited around 15 minutes before sneaking out. He took a different route to reach the lake. He parked his truck a little way away and walked the remainder of the journey. He kept to the shadows and avoided being spotted. The Lakeside Cafe was a tiny establishment with outside seating, known for its delicious iced tea and view of the water from behind a row of shrubs. Ethan spotted Clara at a corner table. She wore a casual summer dress with her hair down, looking stunning in the golden evening. Adam slipped onto the chair beside her. They spoke quietly. Clara appeared uncomfortable, looked around as if frightened that someone would recognize them. Ethan's heart pounded. His breath caught. He wished he could hear their conversation, but he was too far away. Instead, he observed their body language, with Clara leaning forward. Adam places his hand over hers on the table. Clara is not pulling away. Their faces were close. After a few minutes, Adam reached for her chin and gently tilted her face towards him. Ethan noticed Clara's eyelids drift shut as Adam leaned in for a delicate kiss, then longer. There it was, incontrovertible proof, not simply snatched glances, secret doodles, or evasive phrases. A kiss there in the open, as if their vows and reputations didn't matter. Ethan experienced a scorching sensation behind his eyelids. He clenched his jaw, his claws digging into his hands. He stooped down, not wanting to see any more, but unable to flee, he braved another look. Clara backed away slightly, looking nervous but still holding Adam's hand. They paid the bill swiftly. Adam stood up first, searching the area. Clara followed. They parted ways after a few muttered remarks, with Clara heading alone to the parking lot. Adam paused for a minute before departing in a different route. Ethan waited until they were gone. He emerged from the shrubbery. His heart feels burdened. His mind raced. Now he knew for certain, angry and hurt, tangled in his chest. He did, however, have a weird sense of tranquility. He had everything he needed. Confirmation. He could have challenged them right then. But no, that would have been too simple. It's too messy. He preferred something cleaner and more complete. He wanted her to lose everything that made her feel safe, just as she had taken away his sense of security. The following morning, Ethan behaved normally at home. He spoke casually with Clara, who gulped her coffee too rapidly as if she was trying to hide something. He noticed that when he mentioned the water, her gaze flickered away. This pleased him in a dark manner. She felt on edge, but she believed she was safe at the hardware store. He worked on his responsibilities until midday, when Adam unexpectedly stopped by. Adam walked in, looking for a particular type of wood varnish. Ethan greeted him pleasantly as if nothing had happened. "So I've been thinking about what you said," Ethan informed him. "Choose a can of varnish from the shelf. About selling the store. Adam lifted his eyebrow. "Really? How soon?" Ethan shrugged. "I'm just investigating." If I did sell, I'd like to know what my options are. You mentioned that you could know a few investors. Adam removed the varnish and examined the label. I can make a couple of calls. Sure. Perhaps we could meet and discuss details. Ethan nodded. How about we have lunch in a few days? My reward. Adam smiled, revealing dazzling white teeth. That sounds wonderful. Let us say Friday again. Perfect, Ethan said. His voice remained calm and friendly, but inside, the gears were spinning. If he could lure Adam closer and gain his trust, he may find the right angle to put his plan into action. He'd make Adam feel safe, even as he tightened the net around him. After Adam had left, Terry approached. You thinking about selling, boss? You have never mentioned anything before. Ethan offered him a nonchalant smile. Terry, I'm just considering my choices. Do not worry, nothing changes tomorrow. Terry nodded, relieved. You are the one who knows best. As the afternoon went on, Ethan's thoughts drifted. Planning. He needed greater leverage. Clara's sketches were one piece of evidence supporting her secret lunches and kiss. Another. He needed something he could use to pit them against one another. Eventually, if he instilled questions in their minds, they would question each other's commitment. He could see their relationship collapse from within. Over the next few evenings, Ethan made an effort to be kind to Clara. He asked about her day, complimented her dinner. She seems astonished by his tenderness. Perhaps guilty, she attempted to reciprocate by inquiring how business was going at the store, if he needed assistance with inventory. He smiled sweetly and said he had everything under control. His softness was now an intentional choice, designed to throw her off if she felt he was aware of the affair. She would panic, but if he was kind, she might let down her guard and slip up. Meanwhile, Ethan kept detailed notes on Clara's phone calls. He couldn't always hear what she was saying, but he did notice when she went outside to chat softly on the porch or stayed in the upstairs hallway, mumbling into her phone. He'd pass by, casually grabbing a tidbit. Yes, I know, but not tonight. Or, we have to be cautious. No names. But he didn't need them. He knew one late afternoon when Clara left, ostensibly to meet a customer again. Ethan followed from a distance. He chose a different route, parked a few streets away, and quietly followed her on foot. She visited a tiny park beside the lake, sitting on a bench as if waiting. A few minutes later, Adam appeared. They did not kiss this time, but they spoke earnestly. Faces are close. Adam placed his hand on her knee briefly. Ethan remained hiding behind a large hedge. He had a burst of satisfaction. They were making things so easy for him. After they went, he wondered how he could make advantage of their secrecy and stolen meetings. He needed to begin sowing seeds. That weekend, Ethan visited the diner again. He chose a time when June appeared less busy. She approached to top off his coffee. How is it going? She asked. She had a nice smile on her face. Not bad, Ethan said. Actually, June, I have been thinking a lot about the store. I might meet with Adam soon to examine the possibilities. Adam Miller. June spoke, blinking. He's a big shot, right? Ethan nodded. He knows the market and may be able to help me find a buyer, or at least provide some information. He paused. By the way, have you heard about his latest projects? I keep hearing that he is working with a designer on one of his cottages. June paused for a bit and tapped her pen on her notebook. I've heard 2 individuals say he's building an extremely fancy lakefront home. Some think he has a secret investor. Others claim he's only attempting to impress someone. Honestly, I'm not sure. Ethan leaned in slightly. Claire, as you may be aware, is an interior designer. She hadn't mentioned working with him, but his voice trailed off, conveying curiosity rather than accusation. Perhaps she is under a non-disclosure agreement. June offered. Big clients sometimes demand confidentiality. Ethan pretended to consider it. Yeah, maybe. Claire has been relatively silent about her initiatives recently. I guess we'll see what happens. He left soon after, satisfied that he had prompted June to consider Clara and Adam working together. June was well-intentioned but chatty. She had most likely revealed Ethan's curiosity to someone else at some point. It was a modest step, but every step counts in the long run. That evening at home, Ethan brought Adam up in a new way while Clara prepared vegetables for dinner. He leaned against the countertop. "I saw Adam in the supermarket today," he added nonchalantly. "He mentioned refurbishing one of his residences near the lake." Clara's hand paused briefly above the cutting board. "Oh, did he explain what he's doing with it?" "Just hinted at some major changes," Ethan responded. "He stated that he is working with a designer but did not provide their name." He paid close attention to her face. Clara resumed chopping, but her voice sounded tense. "Well, there are many designers in town. Perhaps he's just keeping things quiet until the plans are finished." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I suppose so." He reached for the glass of water. "I'm planning to question him more about it when we meet next week." "Meet?" Clara asked too soon. "Are you meeting Adam?" "I told you I was considering selling the store," Ethan said. "He provided me some suggestions." Clara forced a neutral expression. That is lovely of him, yet her shoulders were rigid. Ethan smirked inwardly. He had rattled her. Good. He wanted her to feel uneasy, allow her to wonder if Adam would make a mistake or say anything that would reveal their affair. The strain ate away at her, and perhaps at Adam, if she had warned him. Clara assumed Ethan had fallen asleep late that night. She snuck out of bed and headed downstairs. Ethan waited a few minutes before following silently. He could see the illumination of her phone screen reflecting on the wall as he stood at the top of the stairs. She stood near the front door, hurriedly speaking into her phone. "I understand, but he's talking to you." "He's interested in selling," she murmured quietly. "Do not mention anything about us or the project. Simply keep it professional. We have to be cautious, Adam. I believe Ethan suspects nothing." She paused. "No, I am confident he does not know. He would have challenged me." Ethan laid his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. She underestimated him. That's exactly what he wanted. After a few minutes, he heard her stop the call, secure her phone, and silently return upstairs. Ethan stood for a moment longer. His heart was beating, with a mix of pain and determination coiling in his chest. She claimed he suspected nothing positive. He'd maintain it like whey until the proper time. In the days that followed, Ethan perfected his strategy and his thoughts. He would continue to befriend Adam in order to discover his financial vulnerabilities. Adam's arrogance can cause him to expose too much. If Ethan could uncover a flaw, a shady transaction, or a dangerous investment, he could exploit it. He intended not only to reveal the affair, but also to undermine Adam's and Clara's stability. She had witnessed the collapse of the guy she had deceived Ethan for, as well as the community's esteem for her. He also intended to utilize June more directly, dropping tiny indications that would reach Clara. Perhaps a message was put into Clara's automobile, or a rumor was uttered just loudly enough for June to hear. If Clara and Adam began to question each other's devotion or honesty, their valuable secret would disintegrate from within. He told himself to take one step at a time and be patient. He had witnessed them kissing, which verified their affair. He'd developed a nice rapport with Adam. He made Clara anxious at home. The groundwork was laid. The next step would be to gradually manipulate them, making them distrust each other's intentions and honesty. In the end, they would destroy one another. Or at least that's how he saw it. Clara breathed sweetly beside Ethan while he laid in bed that night. He recalled the wedding vows they had exchanged years ago. Love and honor. Cherish. She had broken the promises. He felt no shame about what he intended to do. He was only restoring balance. If it meant tearing down everything Clara cared about, so be it. In the dark. Ethan smiled grimly. The fissures were already visible. They would soon expand into full-blown cracks. And as everything came crashing down, he would stand in the rubble, silent and calm, watching the consequences of their deception. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the windows of Cross Hardware, decorating the aged wooden planks with golden stripes. It had been a few days since Ethan confirmed the affair by observing Clara and Adam kissing at the Lakeside Cafe. He had spent those days preparing his plan. In his mind, he is growing closer to Adam, urging June to provide information and building a subtle trap to take advantage of Adam's financial problems. Every step mattered. He stood behind the counter, organizing screws into labeled boxes. Several customers arrived and went. Nothing out of the usual. Terry was reloading lumber in the rear, and the hum of the overhead lights and the quiet chime of the doorbell whenever a customer came provided soothing background noise. His father had taken great delight in this establishment. Ethan felt a short sense of shame for exploiting the thought of selling it as bait. But the feeling faded shortly. The pain of Clara's betrayal honed him. He reminded himself why he was doing it. She had broken their confidence, and he was only returning the favor in a more deliberate way. Around 5:30, shortly before closing time, a familiar person entered. Mr. Young, the restrained accountant who lived a few doors away. Mr. Young rarely communicated beyond the fundamentals. He wore a gray cardigan and pressed slacks, always appearing slightly overdressed for the peaceful village. "Evening," Ethan said respectfully. "Evening," Mr. Young responded, adjusting his glasses. "I need a new lock for my shed. The old one has rusted shut." Ethan nodded and directed him to the aisle containing padlocks and door hardware. He chose a robust brass one. While passing it over, he decided to probe casually. "How is everything in the neighborhood?" Mr. Young shrugged, saying it had been a quiet week. "Mostly, though, I've heard folks mention Adam Miller again. He seems to be making moves on a couple properties. I'm not sure whether this is good or bad news for the rest of us." Ethan managed a half smile. He's clearly ambitious. They headed back to the counter, where Ethan rang him up. Mr. Young stated that he is attempting to acquire a large loan. People claim he is overworked. Of course, this is only a rumor. Ethan's ears perked up. "Oh, seriously? I had no idea about that." Mr. Young shrugged again, uncomfortable with the chatter. "Who knows? Have a nice evening." He snatched the lock and departed. Ethan watched him leave. "I'm feeling a slight flush of satisfaction." Adam's supposed financial problems were well known enough that Mr. Young had heard everything. The more widely whispered it was, the more power Ethan would wield. Ethan arrived home that night to find Clara seated in the living room with a design magazine spread across her lap. She looked up as he entered, her smile, unsure. "You're late," she explained, tucking her hair behind her ear. "A long day at the store." He nodded and slipped his shoes off slightly. "It took me a long time to finish inventory after customers inquired for unusual items." He moved closer, sensing the stress in her gaze. "How about you? Is there any movement on the new client you mentioned?" She hesitated and then nodded. "I've been developing a concept for a living room remodel. Nothing is final yet." He wanted to giggle at how vague she was, but he kept his face neutral. "That sounds wonderful. Please let me know if you need a second opinion." With that, he went to the kitchen to make himself a sandwich. He consciously avoided pressing too hard. Keeping things calm was essential. She must have assumed he was still in the dark after a quiet dinner. Clara went upstairs, claiming she needed to inspect some fabric swatches. Ethan pretended to watch television, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had a lunch meeting with Adam set shortly, and he planned to bring up the notion of selling the store more concretely. If he could entice Adam into disclosing more about his finances, he might be able to get the quick fix he needed. Ethan could later use this against him. The next day, Ethan went for a late morning walk before opening the store. He passed Mrs. Larkin's house where the elderly woman was tending her rose bushes. She waved him over. "Ethan, you're up early." He greeted her heartily. "Morning, Mrs. Larkin. Your roses look nice." She was beaming. "I swear by the fertilizer you advised." Then her voice dropped, as it often does when transitioning to gossip mode. "Did you hear that Adam Miller has been sniffing about the old Gilman property along the inlet? People think he plans to develop a luxury rental." Ethan scratched his chin. "Gilman property that has been vacant for years." "Exactly." Mrs. Larkin described him as ambitious, but I'm wondering if he's taking on too much at once. Ethan gave a contemplative glance. Difficult to say. He looks to be quite confident. Mrs. Larkin nodded and lowered her voice. "The other day, I noticed Clara talking to him near the grocery shop. They appeared friendly. Are you two assisting him somehow?" Ethan's heart squeezed, but he maintained a calm demeanor while assisting him. "Not that I know of. Clara does, however, speak with a large number of people. Part of her job, I suppose. Mrs. Larkin. I would him. Must be innocent enough. I just wanted to mention that." Ethan thanked her and resumed walking. The walls were closing in on Clara. Neighbors noticed. She would soon become too scared to hold herself together. Perfect. At the diner, Ethan noticed June wiping down the counter. The breakfast rush was ended, leaving only a few customers sipping coffee. June smiled at seeing him. "Morning, Ethan. Coffee to go, please," he murmured, leaning on the counter while she made the cup. He took a deep breath. "Hello, June. Remember how I discussed considering selling the store?" She turned. Her gaze was full of interest. "Do you still think about it?" He nodded, changing his tone to something more private. "Yeah. In fact, I'll see Adam Miller for lunch soon to discuss it. He mentioned that he could know some possible purchasers." June nodded, passing him the coffee. "Sounds promising, perhaps," Ethan responded, pretending hesitation. "I really hope Adam isn't in over his head. People claim he's juggling a lot of investments. I would hate to rely on someone who is, unstable." June tilted her head. "I've also heard those rumors. He always seems so certain of himself, though. It's difficult to discern what is true." Ethan shrugged. "Guess I will find out." He drank his coffee. "If Clara asks, simply tell her I've been meeting with Adam. I hinted that I might chat to him, but I didn't give her any details. Don't want to get our hopes up if nothing works out." June grinned heartily. "Sure, not an issue." Perfect. He had just planted a seed. If Clara came around here and frequently stopped for a quick lunch or coffee, June might casually mention Ethan's meetings with Adam. That would make Clara worried about what Adam would say during these discussions. Paranoia would creep in, prompting Clara to press Adam for secrecy or honesty. Cracks would form anyway. A few days later, Adam's lunch arrived. They met at Lakeside Bistro, a restaurant famed for its delicious fish and relaxing atmosphere. Ethan donned a collared shirt, which was rare for him, but he wanted to present a slightly more professional image. Adam arrived in a neat suit and greeted Ethan with a comfortable handshake. Adam replied, slipping into a booth beside the window. "I'm glad you made it." "Thank you for meeting me," Ethan responded. He requested iced tea. Adam opted for sparkling water. They casually discussed the weather and the town's forthcoming fall festival. Finally, Ethan guided the conversation. "So, about the store. I've given it serious thought. My father operated it for decades, and I've kept it going. But I am open to change. Perhaps I could sell it to free up some money. Try something new." Adam nodded, gently tapping his finger on the table. "A hardware store is a neighborhood fixture. Would you sell the building, the business, or both?" "Both," Ethan explained. "I'm looking for a clean break, if I do." Adam considered it. "I know a couple investors that like small businesses that have consistent local foot traffic. Hardware isn't glamorous, but it's reliable. The issue is pricing and timing." Ethan leaned in gently. "I've heard the real estate market is altering. You have a keen eye for these things. How do you manage your current projects?" Adam grinned and did not falter, but Ethan noticed his jaw clench quickly. It is going great. I have a couple things going on, but I'm confident. Ethan pretended not to notice. I am amazed. I know some people say you're pushing yourself too hard, but high risk equals tremendous profit, right? Adam's eyes sharpened. People are constantly talking. I have things under control. In fact, if I see promise in your property, I could consider purchasing it myself. Combine it with another property. Could be a good portfolio item. Ethan nodded slowly, concealing his eagerness. Adam was considering incurring additional debt or diversifying in ways he would not be able to afford. Perfect leverage. Well, if you're serious, we can look into the numbers. I can show you the store's financial statements. It's not a lot of money, but it's solid enough. Adam relaxed. That sounds wonderful. Let's set up another meeting next week. Bring any documentation you have. They ate their lunch and talked about trivial matters before leaving. Ethan casually noted that Claire had been working on design projects. You haven't asked her to perform any job, right? I understand you're refurbishing places. Adam paused, an anxious expression on his face. Me? Not at the moment. Why? Ethan offered a casual shrug. Just curious. She has been keeping secrets lately. Maybe I am simply paranoid. Adam is compelled to chuckle, probably just overwhelmed with other clients. Ethan smiled blandly. Sure. Probably walking back to his truck. Ethan experienced a surge of triumph. Adam confirmed with hesitation that Ethan had rattled him. Adam knew Clara was involved in his projects, but he was lying. Between the financial aspects and the affair. Ethan had all of the ingredients he needed in the coming days. Ethan started leaving small anonymous notes in Clara's car and on Adam's doorstep. He made sure they looked generic, as if they could have come from anyone in town with loose lips. One note to Clara. He is not telling you everything. Are you certain he's fully committed? Another person told Adam she was talking to others. Can you rely on her loyalty? He also took advantage of June's position by informing her about strange rumors he had overheard about Adam's dealings, knowing that June would pass them on to Clara unintentionally, much like a spider spinning a web. During a quiet afternoon at the hardware store, Ethan cast doubt in every direction. Mrs. Larkin came by again, this time just to talk. I swear this town thrives on rumors, she said, leaning against the counter. People say Adam will meet a wealthy investor next month. Some claim he's looking for quick money. Ethan faked surprise. Really? He did say he has big plans but needs quick cash. That seems risky, Mrs. Lark. Inside. I'm not sure what to believe. By the way, I saw Clara the other day and she appeared strange. Has she been okay? Ethan shrugged, his expression neutral. She's probably stressed about her job. Mrs. Larkin nodded. When I mentioned Adam's name, she quickly left the grocery store. Odd. Ethan resisted smiling. Perfect. Clara was feeling the pressure. Soon she would confront Adam, or vice versa. Ethan wanted them to turn against each other, to shatter the fragile trust that affairs frequently rely on. Clara grew quieter at home. She appeared agitated, her eyes darting whenever Ethan mentioned real estate or renovations. One evening, they sat on the porch as the sky turned pink and orange. She eventually brought it up. You've been talking to Adam a lot recently? She continued, maintaining a casual demeanor about the store. Right. Ethan sipped his iced tea. Yeah, he wants to help me find a buyer. Surprised me, but I suppose he's well connected. Clara nodded, her fingers nervously tapping on the armrest. What are your thoughts on him as a businessman? What do I mean? Ethan pretended to consider. He's confident, perhaps overconfident, but who knows, he might actually pull it off. Clara gulped, and he never acknowledged collaborating with any designers on his products. Ethan kept his face blank. Not really. He only says he has some plans. Why? Do you know something that I don't? She shook her head hurriedly. No, I'm just wondering. Her eyes were suspicious, as if she were trying to determine whether Ethan was telling the truth. Ethan stared out at the lake, pretending to be fascinated by the sky's reflection in the water. I guess we'll see how things play out inside. He smiled grimly. She was worried. Good. The following day, a new face appeared at the hardware store. Hank, a man in his mid-50s, claimed to be a local contractor searching for a price on lumber. Ethan made small talk. Do you work with Adam Miller at all? He asked casually after Hank noted that he had done some renovation work around town. Hank nodded. Several times. He pays on time, but he prefers things done quickly and cheaply. Heard he's seeking to get another loan to expand some property. Ethan filed it aside. More evidence that Adam was financially strained. It's good to know, he said. If I decide to sell the store, I might let you know. If the new homeowner requires a contractor. Hank grinned. I would appreciate it. He loaded his timber and departed. Each conversation Ethan had was a new piece of the puzzle. He thought how Adam and Clara must feel right now. Clara doubts Adam's honesty. Adam was concerned about Clara's loyalty and what Ethan might know. Soon, they'd be at odds, and Ethan would hit hardest in the diner. June gave him a knowing smile. I heard you and Adam had lunch. How did it go? Ethan shrugged casually. He is interested in the store. This surprised me, but I'm keeping my options open. June lowered her voice. Clara came by the other day and inquired if I had noticed you talking to Adam a lot. She seemed. I do not know. Tense. Ethan lifted his eyebrow. She did. Maybe she's concerned about me making significant changes. She's always preferred steadiness. June nodded carefully. I told her you had proposed meeting Adam to discuss possibilities. She did not say anything after that. Ethan suppressed the need to smirk. Clara must be freaked out. Perfect. Thank you, June. Hey, if Clara asks for anything else, make it simple. I don't want her to feel stressed. June smiled warmly. Of course, he paid and was satisfied. He had June accidentally confirm to Clara that Ethan was talking to Adam. Meanwhile, Adam received more anonymous signals that Clara was telling Ethan stuff, and Clara was caught in the middle, knowing Ethan was dealing with Adam. I wasn't sure if Ethan was aware of the affair, and I was scared Adam would make a mistake. Back at home, Ethan noticed Clara looking out the window more frequently, as if anticipating someone. She spent more time in her attic office but created fewer design sketches to share with him. He suspected she was too agitated to concentrate. One night he pretended to check something in the attic while she was downstairs. He looked through her folders briefly. The drawings for Adam's cottage remained, but had been altered with notes and revisions. Proof of their involvement. He meticulously replaced everything exactly how it was. He would not confront her yet. Allow the tension to stew. Clara's sleep grew uneasy. He heard her tossing and turning as he feigned to be half asleep while she awoke at midnight to make a hushed phone call. He captured bits. We need to talk in person. Ethan is asking inquiries. No, I haven't said anything, but I am worried. Perfect confirmation that the pressure was effective. As the week progressed, Ethan scheduled another meeting with Adam, this time after the store closed. He informed Clara he had a business conversation with Adam. Clara did not resist, but Ethan could see the terror in her eyes. He expected her to phone Adam before the meeting. He was warned to keep their arrangement a secret. This desperation would only make Adam nervous. Adam arrived at the hardware store shortly after the sun had set. The lighting inside was warm and muted. Terry had gone home and left them alone. Ethan offered Adam a Pepsi from the mini-fridge in the back office. Thanks, Adam replied, accepting it, looking around at the inventory shelves and old family portraits on the wall. You have a nice place here? It feels established, you know. Ethan nodded. Yes, it has history. My father worked hard to develop trust in the neighborhood. That trust keeps customers coming back. Adam took a sip and then got down to business. I had been thinking about your store. If I were to purchase it, I would want to examine thorough financials, monthly revenue, overhead costs, and supplier contracts. Ethan nodded. I can prepare them. Please give me a couple days. Adam appeared relieved. Great. And what about Clara? She has no idea we are discussing details yet, right? Ethan gave him a perplexed look while feigned ignorance. She knows we've communicated, but I haven't revealed specifics. Why? Adam shrugged too casually. Just curious. Just spouses can become worried about major changes. You understand? Ethan grinned weakly. I got it. Do not worry. I'd like to keep this private until it's definite. Adam nodded and went shortly after, leaving Ethan locked up, the weight of victory crushing against his chest. Adam was plainly concerned about Clara's expertise. Clara was concerned about Adam's honesty, and both likely assumed Ethan knew nothing. They were ensnared in a web that he had constructed without ever making a clear charge. On his way home, Ethan stopped by the post office to send a short, anonymous note to Detective Marcus Haynes. I'm dropping it in the after-hours box. The letter indicated at Adam Miller's dubious financial activity. Loan applications were forged, accounts that remain hidden, nothing concrete yet, but enough to pique interest. Haynes was known for being thorough, and if he became intrigued, he may begin sniffing about. This was all part of Ethan's slow-motion endgame. When the time came, he would have a cause for the detective to be there. He envisioned Adam's final confrontation, imprisoned by allegations he couldn't refute. Clara arrived just in time to witness everything fall apart. Ethan would stage the situation such that their disloyalty was exposed. There is no screaming or blatant violence, just a slow, deliberate unraveling. And he wouldn't need to raise his voice for the following few days. Ethan kept the pressure on. He told Clara that he'd meet Adam again, this time to present him financial statistics from the store. Clara turned pale, and her hand trembled slightly as she grasped her coffee cup. How soon? She questioned, her voice tight. Ethan nodded. Yep. I'm surprised he's this interested, but who knows? Perhaps he wants to diversify? Clara managed a grin, but he noticed worry in her eyes as he left for work. He envisioned her calling Adam in a panic. You can't tell Ethan anything. Do not mention me or the designs. Adam would probably reassure her, but deep down he'd be furious or nervous. Perhaps he would blame Clara for raising suspicions, or Clara would accuse Adam of pushing too hard. Either way, their link would deteriorate further. June 2nd played an inadvertent part. Ethan walked by the diner and made a simple observation in June's presence. I hope things work out for Adam. He has a lot on his plate. If Clara returned, June might recount Ethan's statements, exacerbating Clara's fear that Ethan was watching them. Ethan also chose to introduce another character to the mix. Mark, a local bank clerk he had known since high school. Ethan stopped by the bank to get some cash and struck up a discussion with Mark. Hey, I heard Adam Miller has been in and out lately. Mark, who is generally discreet, just nodded and stated that he is always busy with something. We can't disclose anything else due to confidentiality. Ethan chuckled. Not an issue, just curious. I might be dealing with him shortly. Buying or selling? Who knows? Mark grinned awkwardly. Good luck with it. Ethan departed satisfied. Even without specifics, he had sold another link. If Detective Haynes began looking around and happened to speak with bank employees, who knows what could slip? As the week came to an end. Ethan stood in his living room, gazing at a framed portrait of himself and Clara from their honeymoon. They seemed so joyful, so trustworthy. He tried to remember the feeling of love without bitterness, but it seemed distant, like a childhood memory that has faded at the edges. Now he felt nothing but determination. He had assembled his pawns. Adam, Clara, June, the town gossips, even Detective Haynes. He was inundated with information, rumors, and tension. The stage was set for the following phase, planting direct seeds of doubt between Clara and Adam, forcing them to confront each other, and ensuring that when the final showdown occurred at the remote lakeside cabin he had planned, everything would fall apart beautifully. Clara moved through the living room, pausing when she noticed him staring at the photograph. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Ethan turned and gave a small, almost sad smile. "I'm just remembering old times." She reached out to touch his arm before reconsidering and withdrawing. He noticed the gesture when she could have easily wrapped her arms around him. Now there was a chasm. "We have both changed." She spoke softly, her voice wavering. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "Yes, we have." Clara's eyes were filled with uncertainty, but she said nothing else. She left him there in the soft lamplight, silent and unreadable as always. Ethan sighed, his breathing steady. In a way, he was sorry it had gotten to this point, but not enough to stop. The wheels were in motion. He would soon push more anonymous messages that contradicted each other. A subtle hint that Adam intended to cut Clara out. Rumors circulated that Clara was revealing Adam's secrets to Ethan. He'd watch them squirm, doubt each other's feelings, and then, when the time was right, he'd set the trap that would bring them all together for the big showdown. For the time being, he enjoyed the silence. The town slept beneath a starlit sky, unaware of the slow-motion tragedy unfolding in their midst. Tomorrow would bring new whispers and more unease, and Ethan would remain patient as always, guiding events from behind the scenes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ethan's living room as he stood by the window, quietly observing the street below. It had been a week since his lunch meeting with Adam, and he could feel the tension in the air. Clara had become increasingly anxious, and Adam appeared nervous whenever Ethan stopped by with a friendly smile or a real estate question. Each day, the house felt heavier, as if secrets had pressed down on the roof, thickening the air. Clara pretended to be preoccupied with new design projects, but Ethan noticed that she left the house at strange hours, presumably to meet Adam or scrounge for reassurance. She tried to put on a normal face over breakfast, talking about a hardware store paint sale or a new furniture catalog, but her voice trembled slightly whenever Adam's name came up. Ethan said nothing, only making mild comments and nods. Mrs. Larkin slowly pedaled past on her bicycle, a basket filled with flowers. She'd started biking around town recently, claiming it kept her young. She took a quick glance at the cross at home but did not stop. Ethan could imagine what she would be thinking. Something is not right in that household. She was not wrong. As he turned from the window, Ethan dipped into his pocket and took out a folded sheet of paper. Another anonymous note, this one for Adam, was meticulously typed on his computer at the store. He'd print them late at night to avoid attracting attention. According to this note, Claire has been talking. How can you recover if she discloses your secrets? Simple, vague, and devastating. He intended to put it into Adam's mailbox after dark. Clara stayed in the living room that evening, browsing through TV channels without deciding what to watch. Ethan sat in the armchair across from her, reading a magazine on house repairs. Finally, she spoke up. "Ethan, you have seemed distant recently. Are you okay?" Her tone was cautious, searching for indications. He lowered the magazine. "I am fine. I've got a lot on my mind about the store. Selling it is a major decision." Clara nodded. Relief and fear flickered across her features. "Have you communicated more with Adam?" "A bit." Ethan responded, as if it were no big thing. "We're still in the early phases. I will see him again shortly." He didn't offer anything else, so she had to ask whether she dared. She paused. "Is he mentioning anything else about his projects?" Ethan shrugged, faking ignorance. "Not really. He has a really tight lip." "Why are you asking?" Clara's gaze shifted to the television, which was paused during a gardening show. Just curious. He's involved in a variety of activities here, real estate deals and improvements. Ethan gave a little smile. If you are interested, you might ask him directly. Clara stiffened. Oh, I am sure he is busy. Ethan said nothing and returned to his magazine. Allow her to simmer in her own suspicions. She sought reassurance, but he provided none. Later that night, after Clara had fallen asleep fitfully, Ethan snuck out the back door. The darkness was gentle, punctuated by the distant gleam of streetlights. He strolled gently along the sidewalk, past empty driveways and quiet houses. When he arrived at Adams's home, a stylish cottage on the lake, he carefully inserted the typed message into the mailbox slot. He listened for movement inside, but heard nothing. Satisfied. He turned and disappeared into the night. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the hardware store early. Terry greeted him while holding a clipboard. Morning, boss. We're running low on 2x4s. Do you want me to order more? Please, Ethan said absently while checking the register. He tried to appear normal to Terry, a young man who had never suspected the machinations underlying Ethan's calm manner as he piled paint cans. Ethan pictured Adam discovering the note. Maybe Adam would tear it up, or perhaps he would retain it and mull over its implications. In either case, Adam suspects Clara, and Clara, if pressed, suspects Adam as well. After all, he was hiding something from her, wasn't he? Ethan gave himself a modest smile. Around midday, June from the diner came by the store, startling Ethan. She carried a tiny paper bag. Hello, Ethan. I hope I am not bothering you. I brought a few muffins, extras from the diner. I thought you would like them. Ethan's brow raised. Thank you, June. That's kind of you. He accepted the bag and gave her an appreciative grin. June shrugged and leaned on the counter. Not an issue. I felt you may need a pick-me-up. I'm not sure, but you appear to be more serious lately. Ethan chuckled quietly. Am I so obvious? She smiled softly. I am adept at reading people. Is everything okay? He wondered how much to reveal. I just have a lot on my plate. Thinking about future adjustments and such. June nodded and lowered her voice. Clara stopped by the diner yesterday. She appeared disoriented and scared. I inquired if everything was well, and she just smiled and claimed she was busy at work. June paused. I hope I'm not overstepping, but is there anything going on at home? Ethan kept his expression bland. We are merely going through a phase. You are aware of the difficulties that life can present. June regarded him for a time before nodding. If you ever need to speak, I am a good listener. She exchanged a loving look. Then she said her goodbyes and departed. Ethan watched her leave. June's innocence and goodwill provided the ideal setting for whispers and clues to spread. He felt guilty. She deserved more than to be a pawn, but he needed her help, even if she didn't realize it. Clara walked the kitchen that evening as the crickets chirped outside. Ethan entered after locking up for the night. She turned to him, her eyes wild. I received another weird note today. He froze inside but remained cool. What note? Clara opened her purse and took out a folded sheet of paper. When I got out of the grocery shop, I found it slipped under the car's windshield wiper. It says he isn't telling you everything. Find out what he's hiding. Ethan pretended to study the note. Weird. Could this be a prank? Clara's voice shook. I do not know. Perhaps someone is playing with us. Ethan frowned with apprehension. If you like, I can inquire around and see if anyone else received strange notes. Clara grasped the paper tightly. No, it's fine. Maybe it is nothing. All fine, he replied, gently resting her hand on her shoulder. She trembled slightly at his touch, unsure how to take his concern. He took his hand away and went upstairs to shower, leaving her standing in the kitchen, looking lost in the bathroom as hot water battered his shoulders. Ethan gave himself a sour grimace. Receiving a note that echoed what he'd sent Adam would increase their distrust. She'd assume Adam was hiding something, while he'd think she was speaking to someone else. The loop of doubts continued. The next day, Ethan went to the lakeside bistro for lunch. He chose a seat that allowed him to view who arrived and went. Adam entered midway through his lunch, looking nervous and scanning the room as if looking for someone. When Adam saw Ethan, he gave a nonchalant nod and chose a table a few yards away. Ethan sipped his iced tea and pretended not to notice Adam's pain. After a time, he rose and approached Adam's table. "Do you mind if I join you for a minute?" he asked in a kind tone of voice. Adam waved his hand, a tight smile on his face. "Sure." Ethan sat. "How are things going?" "I have started putting together the store's financials. We can meet soon if you wish." Adam rubbed his temples. "Yeah, about that. Let us hold off for a few days. I have some other difficulties that I need to resolve first." Ethan made a sympathetic expression. "Sure, no rush. Is everything okay?" Adam shrugged. Eyes darted to the windows. "People are just poking their noses where they don't belong. I'm getting odd notes in my mailbox." Ethan faked surprise notes. "Like what?" Adam narrowed his eyes. "Just nonsense. Someone is trying to cause trouble." Ethan was silent for a moment. "If it is about our agreement, I haven't informed anyone much. Clara is aware that I am speaking with you, but she is unaware of the specifics. The mention of Clara's name." Adam tensed. "Clara." "Right." Ethan pretended not to notice. "Anyway, please let me know when you're ready to dive into the figures." "I'm here." Adam offered a brief nod, and Ethan left content. Adam's dread was palpable. His confidence in Clara must be fading. If he suspected she was behind the notes. Perfect. Mrs. Larkin later visited the hardware shop in search of a new garden hose. She spoke quietly as Ethan assisted her in selecting one. "People are saying Adam has been acting strangely. There are rumors that he is nervous about something. I saw him in the bank yesterday arguing with a teller. It's very unlike him." Ethan pretended to be somewhat intrigued. "Really? He has always struck me as confident." Mrs. Larkin nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Confidence is his trademark. It's unusual to see him upset. Some believe he's juggling too many deals. Perhaps he's under pressure from investors." Ethan handed her the hose. Who knows? This village thrives on rumors. Probably nothing. Mrs. Larkin gave him a sharp look. "And Clara hasn't seen her smile much recently. Everything okay at home?" Ethan forced a chuckle. "Just work, stress. She has a large project. A very secretive customer." "Secretive." Mrs. Larkin leaned in. "I've always said that secrets never end good." Ethan nodded, noncommittal, and rung up her order. She left once. He let out a slow breath. The town was a pressure cooker, and he pushed the heat up on Clara and Adam. The tension would eventually reach its breaking point. That evening, Ethan saw Clara in her office, pouring at her designs. He stepped in gently. "Need some assistance?" She jumped slightly. "Oh, I didn't hear you enter." "Sorry," Ethan murmured, his tone kind. He looked at the desk. He recognized the sketches of Adams's lakefront property, which were now covered in scrawled annotations. Budget, windows, flooring, cost. She hastily moved another sheet over them. He pretended not to notice. "You okay?" "You seem to be on edge recently." Clara licks her lips. "I am just. I received another note implying that Adam is being dishonest with me. I'm not sure who's sending these or why." Ethan grimaced as though concerned. "That is unusual. What would Adam have to hide if he were only a business contact?" Clara froze and then stammered. "I do not know. Perhaps he's involved in a dodgy deal. You are aware of the nature of rumors." Ethan set a gentle trap. "Perhaps you should speak to him personally." "Clear the air." She shook her head vigorously. "No, no. I don't want him to believe I am accusing him of anything. I will just wait it out." Ethan nodded. Satisfied. She was too afraid to address Adam directly. Fear of being exposed may lead her to do something unwise later. Perfect. Over the next few days, Ethan proceeded to sprinkle hints throughout town. When he ran into June at the diner, he casually noted that Claire had been jumpy. I assume she's concerned about something Adam is doing. June listened sympathetically, unaware that she had subsequently conveyed this to Clara or someone else, passing on the tension like a hidden note in class. He also left another anonymous message for Clara. This time I sneaked inside the mailbox at early. If he refuses to be honest. Perhaps you should question his partners. They understand what is actually going on. Clara would read this and wonder who his partners could be. Would she suppose Adam was collaborating with others to keep deals from her? Ethan composed a similar statement, but with a twist. She's meeting people behind your back. Do you actually know who she is speaking to? He left this one behind. A potted plant on Adam's porch gave the impression that someone who was familiar with the place was responsible. By now, the pattern had been established. Each note mirrored the previous one, raising suspicions that the other side was misleading or leaking information. What was the result? Clara would suspect Adam of withholding information, whereas Adam would suspect Clara of confiding in strangers. Each would develop paranoia that the other was the source of their difficulties. One afternoon, Ethan noticed that Clara's conduct had changed. She began asking subtle questions about Adam. Have you seen him today? Did you chat about anything other than the store? And her tone suggested she was looking for contradictions in Ethan's responses. He responded vaguely, allowing her imagination to run free. Adam, on the other hand, grew increasingly evasive. He canceled their follow-up appointment twice, stating he was too busy or sick. Ethan had caught a glimpse of Adam in the parking lot of the nearby bank. Pacing beside his car, his phone pressed to his ear, he appeared agitated. Probably another agreement that falls through. Or maybe panic is setting in. And through it all, Ethan stayed calm. He went about his regular routine, replenishing stores, conversing with neighbors, and pretending to think about paint choices for a minor home improvement job. Inside, he relished the tension he'd generated. This was not a case of impetuous revenge. The breakdown of their hidden relationship happened slowly. That weekend, the town had a modest outdoor crafts fair by the lake. There were kiosks selling handcrafted pottery, knitted scarves, and local honey. Clara chose to go, possibly to divert herself. Ethan accompanied her, beaming as the neighbors greeted them. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the soft breeze wafted laughing and talk across the grassy park. Ethan was pleased to see June there, assisting one of her friends in running a kiosk selling homemade candles. He waved to her, and she waved back passionately. Clara's stress rose as June approached them. "Hey, you two," June spoke enthusiastically. "Enjoying the fair?" Clara forced a big smile. "It's beautiful, June. There are a lot of nice things here." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, we were simply enjoying the ceramics." June glanced between them, her gaze falling on Clara. "I hope everything is okay. You seemed stressed the last time we spoke. I realize life is hectic, but if you need to vent?" Clara's smile faded slightly. "I am fine. Just work." June nodded and then turned to face Ethan. "Did you ever decide on your intentions with Adam? Do you know about the store?" Clara swung her head around, her gaze fixed on Ethan, who maintained a bland expression. "Not yet," he informed June. "We keep missing one another's schedules, but I am patient." "Patience is good," June stated. She glanced at Clara sympathetically. "I'm confident it will all work out." Clara's hold on the purse intensified. She excused herself and went to a kiosk that sold handmade scarves. Ethan and June exchanged a quick glance, June shrugging with a tinge of uncertainty, as if wondering what had upset Clara. Ethan simply offered a short, reassuring nod and followed his wife as they walked away. Clara snarled beneath her breath. "When were you going to tell me you'd been attempting to schedule another meeting with Adam?" Ethan lifted his eyebrow. I mentioned it. He has been too busy, remember? She shook her head in frustration. I can't recall specifics. This entire thing is. She paused, her eyes darting about to make sure no one listened. I am just exhausted, Ethan. He reached out to comfort her, but she flinched back. I know. Maybe after things calm down, we can go on a weekend trip to clear our heads. She didn't respond. Instead, I'm staring at a ceramic mug display. Her silence spoke volumes. Clara left that night to meet with a client again. Ethan assumed she would try to corner Adam somewhere quiet. Perhaps they kissed by the lakeside cafe or on the marina's edge. He did not follow her this time. He wanted them to have a chat that resulted in no reassurance, no peace, and only more doubt as he waited at home. Ethan ran through the plan in his thoughts. The final phase would be to arrange a private encounter in the cabin, setting the atmosphere for the ultimate confrontation. But first, he needed them completely off balance. The more mistrust he instilled now, the more dramatic their eventual meeting would be. Clara returned late, faces drawn and pallid. She said nothing, going right upstairs. When Ethan arrived a few minutes later, he discovered her sitting on the side of the bed, staring at the floor. You okay? He asked quietly. She looked up. Eyes are wet. I'm not sure who to trust anymore. Her voice crackled. Adam, I feel like everyone is lying to me. These notes? Perhaps even you? Ethan pretended to be shocked. Me? Clara. I'm just trying to figure out my future at the store. I am not lying to you. She placed a hand on her forehead. I apologize. I just feel lost. You would not comprehend. Ethan crouched in front of her, attempting to appear concerned. If you need to talk, I'm available. He hesitated, meeting her gaze. Unless you are hiding something from me, Clara. Is there anything I should know? Her respiration became irregular. She shakes her head. Tears are welling. No, absolutely not. However, her voice lacked conviction. Ethan rose and kissed the top of her head in a delicate, empty gesture. I believe you, he said calmly, leaving the lie in the air. The next morning, Ethan visited Adam's house. He had no appointment and no official cause. He simply wanted to see if Adam was cracking. He knocked on the door. After a lengthy wait, Adam responded. Hair is slightly untidy, and the shirt is untucked. Ethan? Adam spoke in a surprised tone. What up? Ethan gave a casual shrug. I was in the neighborhood. I thought I'd see if you were ready to meet. About the store's finances. If not, no worries. Adam leaned against the doorframe, his gaze shifting to the street. Not today. I am coping with some personal concerns. Ethan tilted his head. Is everything okay? You seem worried. Adam forced a laugh that contained no humor, simply dealing with gossip. People are causing problems. I'll call you when I'm ready. Ethan nodded, indicating concern. Sure, take your time. He lingered for a moment. By the way, Claire has also started receiving odd notes. Do you have any clue who could be behind that? Adam's face became pallid. Claire, I mentioned this to you. Ethan shrugged. She is upset. I warned her it might be a joke, but if you know anything... He left the sentence hanging. Adam gulped. I do not. Good luck with it. He closed the door a little too quickly. Ethan smirked as he walked away. Adam was fraying at the seams, concerned that Ethan would suspect anything. Perfect. That afternoon at the hardware store, a new customer walked in. Carla Johnson had recently moved to town. She smiled warmly and appreciated the store's neatness. She described this place as having a good mood and being more friendlier than the major city. Ethan thanked her and helped her locate a set of picture hooks. They talked about home projects. I'm thinking about turning my extra room into an office, she explained. I might hire a local interior designer. Any recommendations? Ethan paused. My wife, Claire, is a designer. She's pretty good. Carla brightened. Oh, I have heard her name. Some people claim she's quite talented. Ethan nodded. Yes, she is. She's merely preoccupied with a difficult project right now. Carla picked up on his uncertainty. Stressful? This town appears tranquil, but even quiet communities have drama. Ethan made a tiny laugh. You would be surprised. Just remember that not everything is as it appears. Carla smiled suspiciously, paid for the hooks, and then went. Another seed placed. Someone new who may overhear murmurs and wonder about Clara's circumstances. Ethan did not require Carla to perform anything special. He simply enjoyed the thought of having additional eyes and ears in town, gathering rumors. As nightfall fell, Ethan found himself alone at his home office. He went over the notes he had sent, one to Clara, implying Adam's dishonesty, and one to Adam, implying Clara's betrayal. Clara's emotions and Adam's evasiveness had produced results. He typed another short message on his computer, this time directed at Clara. He's pulling away. Ask why, before it is too late. He'd print it at the store tomorrow and deliver it again, perhaps sneaking it into her jacket pocket while she wasn't looking for Adam. He examined a new perspective. She'll meet someone at the cabin soon. Are you certain you're invited? This would set the stage for the cabin rendezvous that Ethan had planned. He wouldn't send this right away, but Adam would quickly be concerned that Clara was going behind his back. And he fled when Ethan enticed him to come there. The slow-motion film Ethan had imagined was playing out exactly as planned. Each scene was a tremor that shook the foundation of their secret connection. Everything would crumble in a spectacular reveal by the time they all stood together at that secluded cabin, Clara, Adam, Ethan, and even June plucking wildflowers by the lake. Ethan slumped back in his chair, eyes half closed. He had no remorse. In his opinion, Clara's betrayal warranted no leniency. Adam's arrogance warranted a harsh lesson. He was only sure that they both received what they had sown. The home was peaceful. Clara is probably downstairs nursing a headache or staring blankly at her phone. Outside, a crescent moon illuminated the lake. If anyone glanced up at the Cross home, they would only see a warm image. Lights glimmer softly, curtains pulled. Nobody would guess. The darkness is spreading within. And so Ethan waited, patient as doubt festered like a slow poison in Clara and Adam's hearts. Soon, very soon, he would go on to the next phase, planning the final rendezvous at the cabin where all secrets would be exposed. He gave a small smile when he heard Clara's footsteps downstairs, restless like a trapped bird. The stage was set. The seeds were sown, and the harvest of disaster would be copious. As dawn rose over the tranquil lakeside town, a gentle rain fell on the roof. Inside the Cross home, Ethan sipped black coffee at the kitchen table while eyeing the bleak sky outside the window. The mornings had become cooler, with hints of early fall seeping in. Soon the leaves would turn dazzling colors. But for the time being, the lake was surrounded by muted greens and a hushed silence. Clara remained upstairs, sleeping fitfully. Ethan heard her toss and turn for half the night. He feared she had another unusual phone contact with Adam, possibly late at night after she assumed Ethan was sleeping. She was rattled. Perfect. He needed her off balance for what was coming next. He opened his laptop and pretended to scan outdated files from the store's accounts, but he was actually completing details. He settled on the cabin, an isolated location off a side road near the lake. One Adam had mentioned in passing as a peaceful location. He used to hold private meetings. Ethan had never gone inside, but he knew enough. Adam had previously assisted a client who owned the establishment, currently empty. Adam had boasted about possessing a spare key, claiming that it might be used for appropriate private negotiations. Perfect. Ethan intended to slip Adam a note implying that the cabin would be the perfect place to conclude their purchase on the hardware business. He'd also leave clues for Clara, enough to make her suspect something important was going on. If she believed Adam was meeting Ethan in private, she would not be able to resist following him, yearning for answers. Meanwhile, he'd made sure June arrived at the lake at the right time. A casual discussion with a mention of wildflowers growing near the cabin might suffice. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Ethan shut his laptop and went upstairs. Clara's side of the bed was suddenly empty. He found her in the bathroom, putting a cool towel on her forehead. "You okay?" he asked softly, standing at the doorway. She was shocked, then sighed. "Just a headache." He examined her reflection in the mirror. The dark circles behind her eyes made her appear older, worn down. She seemed to be on the point of tears every time they chatted, as if too fatigued to maintain the facade. He almost felt sorry, but not enough to stop. "Perhaps you should take it easy today," he suggested neutrally. "No huge plans, correct?" Clara shakes her head. "All I have to do is review some samples." Her voice lacked its previous sparkle. Ethan nodded and went downstairs. He wanted her to believe that he was aloof yet polite, someone she couldn't entirely trust or accuse of wrongdoing, forcing her to stew in her own concerns. Later in the morning, Ethan headed to the hardware store. The town was calm, with only a few individuals out strolling dogs or drinking coffee. When Terry came, he was sweeping the front porch. "Morning, boss," Terry replied, smiling slightly. "I cleaned out the back storage room as you requested. I also found a few antique ledgers." "Thank you," Ethan said, maintaining a polite tone. He enjoyed Terry's consistent presence. It reminded him of simpler times, before all the secrets inside. Ethan double-checked the store's printer and typed 2 more anonymous notes. He kept them brief and vague for Adam. "The lakeside cabin provides guaranteed seclusion. If you want to conclude the transaction, meet me there on Friday, 5 p.m. Come alone for Clara. He is meeting someone at the old cabin off Lakeshore Road. If you want to learn the truth, follow him." He carefully printed these, using the same generic font, and placed them in his briefcase. He would deliver them independently, ensuring that each party received their message at a different time. He felt a shiver down his spine, a combination of anticipation and deadly determination. Everything was coming together. At midday, Ethan went to the diner. June greeted him with her usual warmth, but he could tell she, too, was curious about his recent moodiness. "I got your order, turkey sandwich," June remarked, as she placed a plate in front of him at the counter. "Okay, thank you." Ethan sipped his coffee. The diner was quiet, with only a couple sitting in a corner booth and an older man reading a newspaper by the window, ideal conditions for a private chat. June leaned against the counter. "Everything okay at home?" she asked, her voice low. "Clara looked good. She seemed angry when I saw her last week. I didn't pry, but I'm concerned." Ethan tapped his fingers lightly against the counter. He said, "We're going through a rough patch. I'm attempting to figure out my future with the store. She is anxious about her work, and we are not communicating properly." June frowned sympathetically. "I apologize. Sometimes taking a break is beneficial. You know there's a spot near the lake. People claim there are wildflowers blossoming. I was considering collecting some for a craft fair." "Perhaps I will go tomorrow afternoon." Ethan nodded. "It might be lovely. Actually, I heard someone say that the area near an old cabin off Lakeshore Road is beautiful this time of year. You might find something special there." June's eyes brightened up. "Really? That sounds great. I might just do it." She flashed him a nice grin before moving on to refill another customer's coffee. Ethan gave himself a little contented smile. June would go out that way. With her soft personality, she would not ask why he suggested that location. But when the time came, she would be there, an unintentional witness to the final act. In the afternoon, Ethan traveled to Adam's residence. He parked 2 streets away and walked the rest, pretending he was just out for a walk. When he was certain that no one was watching, he slid the message into Adam's mailbox. He imagined Adam's response. Confusion, perhaps exhilaration at completing the transaction, perhaps suspicion, but Ethan had created enough paranoia that Adam couldn't refuse. Adam would arrive, hoping to achieve a profitable deal or at least understand what will happen next. Ethan turned back to town, passing Clara's car parked outside a neighborhood boutique. He gently wedged the other note between the glass and the wiper. Her nerves are already frazzled. This would bring her to the verge. She'd never be able to resist finding out what Adam was doing in that cabin. Clara felt uneasy at home that evening. She fidgeted with her phone, roamed the living room, and shouted at Ethan over minor issues. The TV volume, the stack of mail on the table. "I apologize," she said, suddenly softening. "I am just tense." Ethan looked up from the newspaper he was pretending to read. "It's okay. Want to discuss it?" Clara hesitated before shaking her head. "No, I will be all right." He nodded and returned to the newspaper. He did not press. She'd probably found the note by now, and her head would be whirling, if she dared to approach him. He would pretend ignorance, but she wouldn't. He was certain she was too terrified to show her hand. Night fell silently, the sound of distant crickets coming in via a broken window. Ethan lay awake, contemplating the situation in the cabin. Adam arrived first, apprehensive, followed by Clara, whose heart was hammering. June is somewhere nearby, collecting wildflowers, stumbling into the drama, and Ethan emerges from the shadows at the exact moment, cool and prepared. He realized he needed to add some finishing touches, evidence, planting. For a long, he had pondered forging documents that linked Adam in financial crimes. He had gathered fragments of Adam's bank information during their conversations, creating emails that suggested embezzlement and money laundering. He had hidden them on a USB stick, along with false paperwork, and intended to put them where Detective Haynes could discover them. Yes, Detective Haynes, he sent that anonymous tip weeks ago solely to stimulate the detective's curiosity, with the cabin meeting scheduled. He'd shortly submit another tip, ensuring that law enforcement arrived at the appropriate time. The next morning, Ethan went to the local police station under the ruse of inquiring about neighborhood safety for business owners. He had a pleasant talk with the front desk officer, Miss Brown, concerning break-ins and security locks. Miss Brown said that Detective Haynes was out on a call, but Ethan did not need to see him in person. He only wanted to remind the police that he was a concerned citizen who cared about the town's integrity. The more he presented a nice, civic-minded demeanor, the less likely anyone would suspect him if concerns arose later. Before leaving the station, Ethan casually said that he had heard reports of dodgy deals near the lake. "I'm sure it's just gossip, but it could be worth keeping an eye on." Miss Brown nodded, taking a mental note. Perfect. Another seed was planted back at the hardware store. Ethan created the final anonymous tip email. He carefully put it into a disposable email account. Illegal money operations culminated at the lakeside cottage on Lakeshore Road. Potential suspects will meet Friday at 5 p.m. On-site investigations may uncover damaging papers. He would not mail it yet. He would wait until the morning of the meeting. Timing was everything. Clara became increasingly reclusive at home. She hardly ate her dinner, pushing veggies around her plate. Ethan attempted to appear anxious but not suspicious. "Perhaps you need some fresh air," he advised. She managed a feeble smile. "Perhaps tomorrow." He knew she was waiting for the day specified in the note. Friday was 2 days away. The tension was palpable throughout the community. Adam was probably doing his own frantic dance. Ethan imagined Adam calling Clara and asking for a clear response about what she knew. Perhaps Clara ignored his calls. Perhaps they communicated in feverish whispers, neither trusting the other. Their alliance had never been based on honesty. After all, it was founded on secrets and desire. Such foundations are quickly compromised under strain. On Thursday afternoon, Ethan returned to the diner. He discovered June behind the counter. "Hey," he muttered, leaning in as she poured his coffee. "Are you going out to collect those wildflowers tomorrow?" June nodded enthusiastically. "Yes." "I asked around and everyone said the old cabin location had some fascinating vegetation. I'm excited to see what I discover. I will go in the late afternoon, less heat." Ethan smiled. "I hope you find something special." Inside, he felt a flush of victory. She'd arrived just before 5 o'clock, precisely as everything went down. He left a big gratuity and walked out. The stage was nearly set. He had one more task. Place the fake paperwork in the cabin. He had to do it tonight, under the cover of darkness. He'd park distant from the scene and then go in. No one went to that cabin. Now he would be safe. After midnight, Ethan sneaked out of the house. Clara was either sleeping or pretending to be asleep. He drove carefully, turned off his headlights near the Lakeshore Road turnoff, and parked under the trees. The night was silent but for distant frogs and the rustle of foliage from a little spotlight. He followed a small trail till he found the cabin. The structure was modest, with aged wooden walls and a creaky porch. He tried, but the door was locked. He anticipated it from his own pocket. He took out a small tension wrench and a pick, items he had preserved from his earlier days experimenting with locks at the hardware store. It took him less than a minute to silently open it from inside. Dust motes danced across the beam of his headlamp. A table, a few chairs, and a musty couch. Perfect. He saw a shelf in the corner and concealed the USB drive beneath a stack of old magazines. He also left a few printed documents, bogus loan paperwork, and damning remarks under the table so that when Detective Haynes arrived, he'd have a reason to arrest Adam. He inhaled the stale air, nodding in satisfaction as he imagined the scene for tomorrow. He exited the cabin and relocked the door on his way back. He took care to leave. There are no footprints on the soft earth, stepping on stones whenever possible. He'd learned to be meticulous during his time at the hardware shop, a propensity of being precise and careful. Tonight, that habit had a darker purpose. Friday morning was serene and sunny, as if the world didn't notice the storm forming beneath. Ethan got up early, showered, and dressed in an ironed shirt and jeans, as if it were any other day. Clara avoided his gaze at breakfast. She plucked at her toast without tasting it. He casually stated that I might meet Adam this evening. Bring up the store again. He paid great attention to her reaction. Her hands trembled slightly. "Oh," she responded, attempting to sound uninterested. "Yeah," he responded, sipping his coffee. He's been secretive, but he hinted that we could complete details soon. He mentioned a peaceful spot near the lake. Clara gulped hard. "That sounds private." Ethan nodded. "I guess he wants no distractions. I'll leave about 5. Her knuckles turned white on the coffee cup. 5. "I get it." He said nothing more. He wanted her to know what time to confirm the notes. Instructions? If she wanted the truth, she'd arrive at noon. Ethan went inside the hardware store's back office and wrote Detective Haynes an anonymous email tip. Tonight at 5 p.m., Lakeside Cabin off Lakeshore Road. Illegal financial transactions. There will be evidence on the location. He became attached. There is no name or signature, only a crime waiting to be revealed. He imagined the investigator reading it would be doubtful, but given the preceding indication, Haynes could decide to investigate. Better safe than sorry. Even if he only brought 1 police, it would be enough to cause pandemonium with 2. Ethan returned to the diner but stayed very briefly, just telling June, "Good luck with the flowers." She smiled, oblivious. Perfect. By 4:30, Ethan was at home, calmly preparing to go. Clara hovered near the living room window, pretending to fix the drapes. He caught a glimpse of her expression, which was a combination of fear, fury, and despair. She said nothing as he walked out the door. Ethan parked his pickup near the beginning of Lakeshore Road and walked the remainder of the way through a lightly forested area. The sunshine seeped through the leaves, causing shifting patterns on the ground. He felt peaceful and even serene. Everything was in place. He arrived at the cottage at 4:55 p.m., remaining hidden behind heavy bushes. He knew Adam would arrive around 5, punctual and uneasy. He was correct. At 4:58, Adam's automobile arrived. Adam went outside, looking around suspiciously. He wore a great shirt, slacks. "I'm dressed for business." He tried the cabin door, but it was locked. So he waited on the porch and checked his watch. At 5:02, I emerged from the opposite side of the bushes. She must have parked further away to avoid detection. She wore pants and a lightweight jacket. Her cheeks flushed from rushing. She hid behind a tree and watched Adam. Ethan could almost feel her heart beating. Now it's time to introduce June. He listened closely. After a few minutes, he heard faint footsteps. June appeared down the pathway. I hold a handcrafted basket in my hand. She looked about for wildflowers. Unaware of the mounting tension, she came to a halt, noticed Adam on the porch, and halted. June recognized him but had no idea what he was doing here. Clara observed June and moved closer to the tree, possibly hoping he wouldn't notice her. Meanwhile, Adam looked at his phone, murmuring curses under his breath, wondering why Ethan wasn't presenting himself. Ethan waited for a few more minutes. Allow the tension to grow. He needed Clara close enough to reveal herself. If she saw Adam waiting anxiously and June lurking nearby, her curiosity would drive her forward. Finally, Ethan emerged from the shadows, cautiously approaching toward the cabin. He made enough noise to have Adam look up. His expression was a mix of relief and mistrust. "You are late," Adam spoke, attempting to sound confident but failing. Ethan shrugged, calm as always. Took a detour. When June noticed Ethan, he stopped moving. She knew both him and Clara. This must appear bizarre. Clara must be losing her wits after seeing Ethan and Adam together. She'd reveal herself any moment now. And she did. Clara emerged, trembling, her voice wavering. "Ethan? Adam, what is going on?" Adam's eyes expanded. "Clara, what are you doing here?" Ethan kept his expression bland. He gently turned to face Clara. "I think you both understand why we're here." Clara's face was distorted with dread and perplexity. Before one of them could speak, Adam straightened and tightened his fists. Ethan lifted his hand, voice low and steady. "You've both been lying and sneaking around. I am aware of the affair." He let the words hang, each syllable like a hammer blow. Clara's eyes flooded with tears. Adam stepped back from the corner of his vision. Ethan noticed June edging away, appalled but unable to leave the scene. Perfect. She'd be an eyewitness recalling every anxious moment. Ethan said, "You thought you could betray me and escape unscathed. I've spent weeks watching and waiting for every note, rumor, and suspicion. You fell for everything." Clara coughed out. "Ethan, I am sorry." He interrupted her with a gaze that made her flinch back. Adam attempted to bluff. "This is ridiculous. We can discuss things out. Let us just—" Ethan smiled coldly. "Talk it out. I believe we've moved past that." "You're in serious trouble, Adam. Those dodgy investments you believed you could conceal. I have proof. The cops will be here any minute." Adam's face blanched. "What exactly are you talking about?" Clara stared between them, astonished. June's presence among the trees, half hidden, added a spooky feel. She'd remember this moment as surreal, like a dreadful dream. As if on cue, distant car engines approached, echoing across the peaceful woods. Detective Haynes and a cop would come shortly. Ethan walked away from Adam and Clara and stepped toward the cabin's entrance, extracting a key he had grabbed earlier. He picked the lock and opened it, gesturing inside. "You will find everything here. The emails and documents. That's enough to send you to jail. Adam lunged forward, attempting to stop Ethan, but Clara grabbed his arm and hurriedly whispered, "Don't make things worse!" Adam shook her off, scared, realizing he was stuck. He exclaimed, "You set me up! This can't be real." Ethan did not answer. He just stayed there, quiet as a statue, as a police cruiser approached, Detective Haynes stepping out with caution, hand on his holster. Another cop followed, examining the area. Haynes saw the tableaus. 3 people, tight and silent, and a woman, June, off to the side, clutching a basket of wildflowers. He'd gotten an anonymous tip. He now had suspects and a location. He stared at Ethan. What's happening here? Ethan stepped back, allowing Haynes to see inside the cabin. I summoned you here because I suspected Adam Miller was involved in illicit activity. He lied convincingly, implying that he was the whistleblower. I was terrified he'd harm me if I approached him alone. Perfectly delivered, combining truth and lies. Naturally, Adam sputtered. He is lying. He set me up. Check the paperwork. They are most likely bogus. Haynes frowned as she motioned the other officer inside. Moments later, the officer emerged, carrying the USB drive and suspicious-looking documentation. Adam's skin turned more paler. Clara began to sob silently, realizing how deep the betrayal was. Ethan gazed at Clara without sympathy. You picked him over me. Look how much it's cost you. Clara attempted to speak, but no words emerged. Haynes motioned to handcuff Adam, who objected furiously. You cannot do this. I have done nothing wrong. But with Ethan's well-placed evidence, Haynes had enough grounds to imprison Adam. The last twist of the knife. Adam was carried away in handcuffs, yelling his innocence into a silent wilderness. Clara stood alone, tears streaming down her face. She reached out to Ethan, but he backed away. Don't, he said. This is what you deserved. Haynes looked at them carefully, doubtful of the real tale. June hovered, horrified and wordless. Clara learned gradually and painfully that she had no allies left. Her reputation would collapse. The story would travel around town like wildfire. Ethan gave Clara a final terrifying look before walking away. He passed June, who glanced at him with wide eyes. He gave her a slight nod. He knew she'd keep his secret out of both surprise and loyalty. He retreated into the woods, calm and satisfied that he had carried out his plan precisely. The final gathering at the cabin had fulfilled its objective. Adam has been incarcerated, Clara has been discredited, and Ethan's revenge is accomplished. The slow-motion video he had created ended with that exquisite, horrific scene. He felt no sorrow, only grim satisfaction, and a strange, empty grief that everything he had loved had been reduced to this. As late afternoon approached, the lakeside town fell into a hushed silence. The sky was pale blue, with thin, wispy clouds. It was the kind of afternoon that felt calm and unpretentious, ideal for fishing from a pier or strolling along the ocean. But behind the tranquil surface, a storm was about to erupt, painstakingly planned by Ethan Cross. He arrived early. Hide behind a bush of mountain laurel near the old cabin on Lakeshore Road. He had chosen this location deliberately. From here, he could see the cabin's porch, but remained hidden. The forest was dense, with long shadows. He crouched down to wait. Silence settled in. Only the trill of a bird or the stir of a small animal in the brush in his pocket broke the silence. Ethan carried his phone on silent mode and a folded piece of paper, explaining the counterfeit he'd hidden within. He hadn't expected to need it now. He had completed his task during the last few days. This final act was about execution. As he knelt there, he couldn't help but recall the dinner party where he first observed Clara and Adam's lingering stares, the day he discovered the designs that verified his suspicions, and the numerous subtle manipulations he'd used since then, all leading up to this moment. At 4:58 p.m., he heard the crunch of gravel as a car approached down the narrow lane. His heart thumped with measured rhythm. He had anticipated Adam to arrive first. Adam was the type who wanted to have the advantage by arriving first. Adam Miller's black vehicle came into view and parked just off the road. Adam stepped out, assessing his surroundings. He wore a light jacket over a dress shirt, as if he was attempting to look professional, but also fitting in. His face appeared stiff and anxious. Ethan paid close attention as Adam reached the cabin's door. Naturally, the cabin had been locked. Adam tried the knob, found it unresponsive, and paced the porch, muttering to himself. He grabbed out his phone, most likely to check the time or to text Ethan, but he wouldn't dare cancel this appointment. Ethan had dangled the promise of closing the hardware business sale and intimated that he had important documents for Adam. A few minutes later, Ethan's focus diverted as another figure arrived from the opposite direction, gliding softly through the trees. Clara. She wore jeans and a windbreaker. Hair pulled back, face pales. She too had followed the clues, exactly as Ethan had planned. He could almost feel her apprehension in the air. She hid behind a tree, looking around its trunk and keeping an eye on Adam from a distance. Her posture seemed stiff, as if she anticipated a confrontation or a revelation. She was unsure she could handle it. Ethan remained still, allowing them both to simmer for a moment. In the distance, he noticed activity. Someone else. Perfect timing. June Parker, carrying a handmade basket, walked along the lakefront trail. She chose a basic denim skirt and a lightweight sweater. The eyes scour the ground for wildflowers. Ethan had stated that June probably hadn't seen Adam or Clara yet, but she was close enough to hear heated conversations. If it came to that, her presence was an unintentional witness that Ethan had deliberately orchestrated. He wanted someone to remember this day, to ground the story in local gossip and perpetuate the myth long after he was gone. At 5:05 p.m., Ethan thought it was time to step out of the bush, gently and intentionally, creating enough noise to alert Adam. Adam spun around and shocked Ethan. Adam said, attempting to project confidence. "You are late." Ethan gave a calm, almost regretful grin. "It took a little longer to arrive than I expected." He stepped onto the loose gravel near the cabin stairs out of the corner of his eye. He noticed Clara tighten, pressing herself tighter against the tree trunk in the hopes of remaining undetected. Adam made a stiff nod. "Okay, let's get down to business." He lowered his voice. "You have the information about the store deal. I need to understand what you're asking." Ethan did not respond immediately. Instead, he maintained silence while observing Adam's face. He wanted Adam to squirm. After a pause, Ethan remarked, "I'm curious, Adam, how you find the time to juggle so many projects. Real estate deals, secret renovations, and personal entanglements must be exhausting." Adam frowned. "What exactly are you talking about?" "I'm here to discuss the store." Ethan inclined his head slightly, of course, but I can't help but think there's more going on here. You've been getting notes, right? Strange warnings. Claire has also started getting them. He repeated Clara's name pointedly, and Adam's eyes widened. He wanted Adam to be off balance. Adam blinked, then attempted to hide his amazement. "Clara, I'm not sure what kind of game you're playing. Let us get this over with." Before Ethan could react, there was a stir. Clara stepped into view. Heart is throbbing. She decided she couldn't stay in the shadows any longer, not since Ethan mentioned her name. Her cheeks were flushed. Eyes are moist. "Ethan." "What's this?" she demanded with shaky voice. "Adam, why are you here? What's happening?" Adam looked like he had seen a ghost. "Clara, why the hell are you following me?" He cast an uncomfortable glance at Ethan before returning his attention to Clara. "This is not as it appears." Clara gave out a nervous laugh. "I'm not even sure what it should look like. I also received messages informing me that you were hiding something and that I should come here if I wanted to know the truth." Ethan stood calmly to one side, like a conductor who had just brought both musicians on stage. He felt June's presence nearby. She'd come to a halt a little distance away, crouched down as if admiring a patch of flowers, but was actually immobilized by the strangeness that was unfolding. Ethan knew June would be watching, building together an incomplete story in her head. Perfect. Adam raised his voice defensively. It has nothing to do with you, Clara. I'm here for business with Ethan. Clara's eyes narrowed. Business? I suspected you had been lying to me. She gagged on her words and refused to continue the thought. But the innuendo lingered in the air. She believed he cared about her, and that their relationship meant anything. Ethan stepped forward, hands in his pockets, stance relaxed. Let's lay it all out. His voice was calm but firm, and Adam and Clara looked at him as if compelled. Clara, you and Adam were meeting behind my back. I am aware of the affair. I have known for weeks. Clara's face became ashen. Ethan, please. He cut her off. I gave you all the rope you needed to hang yourself. You received letters and heard rumors. June mentioned the suspect documents. I orchestrated everything. I set up this trap, and you both stepped right into it. Adam was enraged, looking about for a way out. He stepped closer, Ethan, his voice low and intimidating. You are insane. Why would you do all of this? Ethan stood his ground, saying slowly as if relishing each word. Because I wanted you both to understand how I felt when I uncovered your betrayal. I wanted you to distrust each other, lose sleep, and question who you could trust, and here we are. Clara was softly crying now, tears running down her cheeks. Ethan, I apologize for making a mistake. He shot her a chilly. Look, a mistake is failing to lock the door. Your actions were deliberate. You lied to me and breached our vows. And for what? Excitement. Novelty. He shook his head, bitterness creeping into his words. Adam attempted to take charge. Look, you have your confession. I'm not sure what else you want, but I'm not going to stick around for a lecture. He turned, intending to storm out, perhaps hop into his car and drive away, but Ethan spoke again. The voice has softened now. Wait, Adam, there's another guest on the way. He looked down the dusty road, as if expecting someone. Clara and Adam looked at him, bewildered. The seconds passed by. June moved anxiously, keeping as still as possible. She had heard enough to realize that this was both hazardous and very personal. She didn't want to be caught eavesdropping, but she couldn't simply run and make noise. The silence was broken as if on cue by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A police cruiser came into view, followed by another unmarked car. Adam's eyes widened. What the hell? Have you called the cops? Clara gazed at Ethan, terrified, and crossed her face. Ethan, what did you do? Ethan carefully stepped back, allowing the approaching individuals to view Adam and Clara clearly. Detective Marcus Haynes emerged from the cruiser and straightened his jacket. He was a tall man with a tired expression, as if he would rather be somewhere else on a Friday evening. Another cop, a younger lady, followed him, hand resting on her holstered firearm. Haynes took in the situation, which featured 3 persons in a tense standoff near a cabin, all appearing terrified. He cleared his throat. We received an anonymous information concerning unlawful financial activity here. He held up a folded printout. Can you explain what's happening on? Adam sputtered. Financial transactions. This is some type of setup. I am not involved in anything criminal. He turned accusingly at Ethan. Did you plan this? Ethan gave a slight shrug, as if admitting nothing and everything at the same time. Detective, I felt Adam Miller was doing dubious business. Embezzlement or fraud. Who knows? I was afraid he would become aggressive if confronted. So I came here, expecting to persuade him to hand over evidence. Ethan's tone was calm and controlled, portraying himself as a concerned citizen. Clara went forward, her voice shaking. This is a misunderstanding. Ethan, please speak the truth. Haynes lifted a hand to halt her. Ma'am, we'll need to inspect what's in that cabin. The tip was really specific. Assuming Mr. Miller is innocent, we will confirm that. Adam paled. He had not gone inside the cabin. He had no idea what Ethan had planted. He stammered, "I've never been in there before." The younger cop approached the cabin door. It was locked, but Ethan quietly removed a key from his pocket. "This arrived in my mailbox anonymously." He lied smoothly. "I figured it might open the cabin." He delivered it to the police, who then unlocked the door. Clara slapped a hand to her mouth, recognizing how far Ethan's plot had gone. She looked about urgently at Adam, Ethan, and the detective. She caught sight of June standing a short distance away. Their eyes met briefly. June's countenance was shocked, perplexed, and possibly even empathetic. But she didn't say anything. Inside the cabin, the officer's flashlight beam swept across dusty surfaces. She reappeared moments later carrying a USB drive and a stack of paperwork. "Detective, you should see it. Bank statements and emails regarding offshore accounts. It's quite incriminating." Adam surged forward. "No, that can't be real. You cannot genuinely imagine I would leave proof laying around." Haynes examined Adam's face. "We'll be able to evaluate their genuineness soon enough. For now, I'm bringing you under arrest on suspicion of financial offenses." He nodded at the other cop, who moved to handcuff Adam. Adam resisted briefly, pleading his innocence, but it was ineffective. The officer wrenched his arm behind his back and snapped the handcuffs with a firm click. He scowled at Ethan. Fury and terror mingled. "Did you do this?" he snarled. The voice cracked. Ethan did not flinch. He simply watched, arms crossed. Clara wailed silently, walking back as if she wished to hide into the trees. Everything was unraveling. She recognized that Ethan had not only engineered Adam's mental distress, but also framed him for something worse. Whatever affection or sympathy she had formerly felt for Adam, or whatever animosity she had for Ethan, had now been replaced by simple shock. Haynes turned to Clara. "And you are." Clara gulped. "Clara, Cross. Ethan is my spouse. I had no idea about any of this, Haynes either." Skeptically. "Did you follow Adam here?" "Why?" She stammered for words, looking at Ethan. "I received an anonymous note stating that he was withholding things that I needed to see for myself." Her voice came out tiny and broken. Ethan sighed softly, assuming the role of a weary truth-teller. "Detective, Adam lured my wife into this mess. He manipulated her. I was also trying to protect her by exposing him." Haynes narrowed his eyes. He sensed layers of deception that he couldn't quite unravel right now. "We'll have to take statements from every one of you." He gazed at Adam before returning his attention to Ethan and Clara. "For the time being, we will be accompanied by Mr. Miller." The younger cop led Adam, shouting against the cruiser as she went. June crept nearer, her voice shaking. "Ethan? Clara, is everything okay?" I was only plucking flowers when Haynes raised his brow. "Miss, do you know these people?" June nodded. "Yes, I know Ethan and Clara. They are regulars in the diner where I work." Her gaze shifted to Clara's tear-streaked face. Then I saw Ethan's calm demeanor. "I don't understand what happened here." Ethan gave June a kind, sleepy grin. "It's complicated. I'll explain another time." Clara began sobbing openly, realizing how far she had gone. Her reputation would be shredded by sunrise, the townspeople would whisper. Clara Cross and Adam Miller are caught up in a scandal at a cabin. Adam's arrest. Ethan's calm demeanor. Everything pointed to Clara's participation, even if she had not handled the fraudulent paperwork. She looked to Ethan, pleading quietly for mercy and solace, but he provided none. Detective Haynes spoke again. "Mr. Cross, we will need you and Mrs. Cross to come down to the station tomorrow to provide a formal statement." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Of course, Detective. I will totally collaborate with that." Haynes accompanied his officer, and Adam returned to the cruiser. The engine started, the taillights flashing crimson in the dusk. They then drove away, leaving Ethan, Clara, and June standing in the calm, deserted clearing. June moved closer. The voice scarcely rose beyond a whisper. "Ethan, what is going on? This feels surreal." He caught her gaze, allowing a tinge of fatigue to creep in. "I am sorry you had to see this, June. It's just complex. Like I mentioned." Clara attempted to speak, but her voice faltered. She wrapped her arms around herself and shook. June, divided between confusion and compassion, extended a hand on Clara's shoulder. Clara stepped away. Shame washed over her face. She couldn't take June's pity. Finally, Ethan turned to face Clara. "You desired excitement, Clara. Now you've got it. I hope it was worth the money." His tone was cold, giving her no space to beg forgiveness. With that, he went away, following his path through the forest. He did not run. We were not in a rush. He moved calmly, as if concluding a chapter in a book. Clara knelt behind him and wept softly. June hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to console Clara or pursue Ethan. Finally, she knelt alongside Clara and tentatively placed a hand on her shoulder. Clara did not push her away this time. The slow-motion film Ethan had envisioned was finished. He had planned every cue and entrance. Adam was being held in jail. Clara is shamed and a bewildered but sympathetic witness. June would spread the story throughout town. Detective Haynes, the weary investigator, would be dealing with a messy case. But there is enough proof to put Adam in jail. Nobody could have predicted how meticulously Ethan planned. He delicately placed each domino. They only saw the final tumble as Ethan approached his pickup and hopped inside. He experienced false satisfaction. He had accomplished what he set out to do, made Clara pay for her betrayal. However, when he turned the key in the ignition, he felt a weight on his chest. Revenge had tasted harsh. It's not sweet. He reminded himself that this was necessary, that Clara's treason could not go unpunished. He drove away, leaving Lakeshore Road behind the cabin, which faded in his rearview mirror until it was swallowed by twilight. Soon, he'd make plans to sell the hardware store and disappear before daybreak, leaving the village to spread stories for years. Clara wept inside the cabin's clearing, and June tried to console her while the aroma of wildflowers drifted through the evening breeze. Detective Haynes would return, full of questions. The village whispered, and Ethan's legacy lingered. A cautionary story of betrayal and retribution served cold. Ethan stood motionless at the hardware store's doorway, the shelves meticulously organized. He turned the open sign closed for the last time. The glass displaying his unsmiling face outside Lake Summerside extended calmly in the pale morning light. A scene of tranquility that parodied the mayhem erupting in town. His father's legacy had been the hardware store, a gathering place for neighbors seeking guidance, tools, or simply to discuss the weather and fishing locations. But now it was a tomb for what Ethan had once been. Betrayal made him unrecognizable, even to himself. He closed the door and pocketed the keys, which felt strangely weighty. Nearby, Terry approached, perplexed. "Boss, are you certain about selling? This location holds great significance for everyone in the area." Ethan managed a little reassuring smile. "It's time to move on, Terry. You have everything under control without waiting for a response." He nodded and walked to his truck, leaving behind the last connection to his previous existence. The controversy had erupted earlier that morning, leaving the quiet lakeside town boiling with rumors. Detective Marcus Haynes, tipped off by the anonymous letters, had amassed sufficient circumstantial evidence to pay Adam a visit. Ethan wasn't there to witness it firsthand, but word spread quickly. Mrs. Larkin, who was always eager to analyze other people's business, contacted the store minutes after it occurred. Detectives were present at Adam's home. She had breathlessly reported fraud. They believe financial papers are in disarray. Someone also mentioned shady property deals. Could you imagine? Her tone was joyful rather than shocked. Clara must be beside herself. Didn't she work on anything for him? Ethan had responded with false worry. His face remained blank as he tightened a row of bolts on the counter. Inside, he felt a tinge of contentment. The trap had sprung, and the pieces fell precisely as he had planned. Clara's environment, meanwhile, was deteriorating. That afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands quivering, as she held a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Ethan entered quietly, viewing the situation with clinical detachment. Clara looked up. Her face was pale and blotchy from sobbing. "Did you hear?" she croaked. "They've arrested Adam." Fraud. They discovered her voice had broken and she buried her face in her hands. Ethan sat across from her, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice calm, as if offering condolences at a funeral. "I didn't realize it was this serious." Clara's eyes flashed upward, filled with despair. "You knew I was working with him, but I didn't. I wasn't sure what he was doing." Her voice cracked into a whisper. "I trusted him." Ethan's expression didn't change. He leaned forward slightly. "Did you?" His words were quiet, but the weight of them fell like a hammer. Clara's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, her shoulders slumped under the crushing realization of her complicity, whether by ignorance or willful blindness. Ethan stood his chair, scraping the floor, and walked to the window outside. Mrs. Larkin passed by on her bicycle. Her head craned toward the house, undoubtedly speculating about what might be unfolding inside. "You'll have to face the neighbors eventually," Ethan said, his back still to Clara. "They'll have questions about why you were so close to Adam." Clara flinched visibly, her voice barely audible. "What am I supposed to say?" Ethan turned to face her, his tone neutral. "The truth, I suppose, but that's up to you." Her eyes searched his for any sign of forgiveness, but she found none. "Ethan, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please, can't wait." She choked on her words. "Can't we fix this?" Ethan's gaze softened momentarily. Not with love, but with pity. "Some things can't be fixed, Clara." He left her sitting at the table, her sobs muffled by her hands. Later that evening, Ethan walked the quiet streets of the town, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He stopped briefly at June's mailbox, slipping a sealed envelope inside. She had been a kind bystander to his unraveling, a mirror of the innocence he once knew, but no longer possessed. The letter wasn't an explanation. It was a confession, written in restrained, measured words. He thanked her for her kindness and hinted at the darkness he had grappled with, ending with a request. "Don't tell anyone where I've gone. Let the town make its own story." As he reached the edge of the lake, he paused to look back at the town one final time. From this vantage, it was picturesque, almost serene, the golden lights of the homes reflecting on the water. But Ethan knew the reality beneath that surface. Secrets, betrayals, and the weight of shattered trust. He felt no triumph in his revenge, only a hollow ache where his love for Clara had once lived. The last sound of the evening was the crunch of gravel beneath his boots as he turned away, vanishing into the shadows of the distant city streets. Behind him, the town would buzz with theories and whispers, but Ethan Cross was done with it all. For now, the only voice he would listen to was the quiet one inside, urging him forward, away from the wreckage he had orchestrated. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.